Tonight, we move gently through the outer edges of the Fallout world, into stories that existed alongside the main roads of history. These are places reached later, remembered quietly, and often overlooked, yet shaped by the same war and the same long aftermath. Each chapter unfolds beyond the familiar paths, revealing experiments left sealed, communities left behind, and ambitions that survived long after their creators were gone. There is no urgency here, only continuity. One story gives way to the next, not as separate tales, but as fragments of a single world, still breathing beneath the dust, waiting to settle. Operation Anchorage exists not as a memory of war, but as a carefully constructed version of one. It is not the Anchorage that soldiers walked through, nor the Anchorage civilians endured, but a version designed to be efficient, instructive, and emotionally clean. In this reconstruction, the snow never truly melts, the sky never changes, and the outcome is always certain. Victory is assumed from the beginning, and sacrifice is reduced to a mechanical step along a predetermined path. The real Anchorage campaign took place during the final years of the Sino-American War, when Alaska became one of the last remaining battlegrounds over dwindling resources. Chinese forces had occupied the region in an attempt to secure access to oil reserves, and the United States responded with overwhelming force, deploying experimental technologies that would later define modern warfare. Power armor units, advanced energy weapons, and automated battlefield logistics all saw widespread use in Alaska, turning the frozen landscape into a proving ground for the future of war. But the version preserved within Operation Anchorage is not meant to record that history. It is meant to rewrite it. The simulation was developed by the United States military as a training tool, using virtual reality to prepare soldiers for combat without the cost of human lives. Inside the simulation, the conflict is simplified. American forces are disciplined, unified, and unquestionably righteous. Enemy soldiers appear predictable and expendable, stripped of individual identity. Tactical decisions carry no moral weight beyond efficiency. There are no civilians, no hesitation, and no unintended consequences. War becomes a puzzle to be solved rather than a human catastrophe to be endured. This artificial clarity reflects the mindset of the pre-war military establishment. As global tensions escalated and resources became scarce, the emphasis shifted away from restraint and diplomacy toward technological dominance. War was no longer framed as a failure of politics, but as an inevitable function of progress. The Anchorage simulation embodies this belief, presenting conflict as something that can be optimized, refined, and repeated until perfected. Within the simulation, soldiers are not trained to question orders or adapt to moral ambiguity. They are trained to execute objectives. Each mission flows seamlessly into the next, reinforcing the idea that war is a controlled environment where outcomes can be engineered in advance. Loss is acknowledged only as a statistic, not an experience. Pain exists only as a temporary inconvenience, easily reset with the press of a button. What is missing from the simulation is as important as what is included. There are no long-term consequences, no trauma carried forward, no exhaustion that lingers after battle. The war ends cleanly, decisively, and without residue. This absence mirrors the broader pre-war attitude toward conflict, where the true costs of violence were obscured by distance, propaganda, and technological abstraction. The soldiers who trained using Operation Anchorage were conditioned to see war as a series of objectives rather than a series of human moments. The simulation rewarded aggression, decisiveness, and unwavering obedience. It offered no space for doubt or reflection. In doing so, it prepared soldiers not just for combat, but for a worldview in which efficiency outweighed empathy. This approach was not limited to Anchorage. Across the United States, military doctrine increasingly relied on simulations, projections, and controlled environments to plan for conflicts that were growing more complex and more destructive. The reliance on virtual training created a growing gap between expectation and reality, between the clean lines of simulated warfare and the chaotic, irreversible nature of real conflict. After the Great War, Operation Anchorage remained sealed within the ruins of a military outpost, its systems continuing to function long after the world they were built to defend had vanished. The soldiers who once trained within its virtual landscape were gone, but the simulation itself endured, looping endlessly through a war that could no longer be won or lost. In this way, Operation Anchorage became a monument not to victory, but to detachment. It preserved a version of history that never truly existed, one where war could be mastered without consequence. The frozen battlefield remained locked in time, replaying a moment when humanity believed it could control the future through technology and discipline alone. The irony is quiet but persistent. The same mindset that produced Operation Anchorage also contributed to the world's destruction. By reducing war to a technical problem, the pre-war world failed to recognize the moral weight of its decisions. Conflict became something that happened elsewhere, to others, until it happened everywhere at once. Operation Anchorage does not teach how the war was fought. It teaches how the war was imagined. It reveals a society that trusted simulations more than lived experience, that valued certainty over understanding. In the calm repetition of its virtual battles, it reflects a civilization that believed it could rehearse its way through catastrophe, unaware that some outcomes, once reached, cannot be reset. The pit exists as a place where survival never separated itself from suffering. Long before the war, Pittsburgh was defined by steel, smoke, and relentless labor. After the bombs fell, those same qualities remained, stripped of structure and restraint. The city did not collapse into silence. It collapsed into motion, into constant work driven by pain rather than progress. Radiation settled deep into the rivers and factories, seeping into metal, flesh, and bone. The industrial heart of the city continued to beat, but without regulation, protection, or mercy. Those who remained were forced into an environment where the air itself carried slow poison, and where adaptation became the only alternative to extinction. Mutation followed exposure, not as a sudden transformation, but as a gradual erosion of what had once been human. The Trogs emerged from this process. They were not created by a single experiment or weapon, but by prolonged exposure to radiation, disease, and deprivation. Former workers, families, and survivors were reshaped over time into something feral and unstable. Their presence served as a reminder that the city itself was still alive, still consuming those who stayed too long within its boundaries. Into this environment came Ashur, a former Brotherhood of Steel paladin who arrived not as a liberator, but as a realist. Where others saw a dead city, Ashur saw a resource. The mills still stood. The forges could still burn. Steel could still be produced, and steel meant power. To him, survival required order, and order required control. Ashur rebuilt the pit around this principle. He established a rigid hierarchy where production became the highest value. Labor was mandatory, enforced through slavery rather than cooperation. Those brought into the city were given a single purpose: work until they either adapted or failed. Freedom was deferred indefinitely, promised only through vague future stability that never truly arrived. The suffering of the slaves was not accidental, it was integral to the system. Ashur believed that the city's environment would inevitably kill the weak, and that only those capable of enduring it deserved to shape the future. Cruelty, in his view, was not a moral failure but a necessary filter. Pain became a tool, just as steel had once been. His wife, Marie, offered a quieter counterbalance. A scientist focused on curing the Trog degeneration. She believed that the city's brutality could eventually be replaced with something less destructive. Their child, born immune to the mutation, became the fragile symbol of that hope. To others, The child represented a future stolen from countless lives in the present. The city's slaves did not share Ashur's patience. To them, survival under his rule meant constant exposure to radiation, disease, and violence, with no guarantee of reward. The promise of a cure remained distant and uncertain, while the suffering was immediate and relentless. From this resentment grew rebellion, led by those who believed that no future was worth such cost. The pit thus became a place trapped between two forms of cruelty. One claimed to be temporary, justified by progress and long-term survival. The other rejected that justification entirely, seeking immediate freedom regardless of consequence. Neither path offered comfort, only different interpretations of necessity. What makes the pit distinct is not its violence, but its consistency. There is no illusion of safety, no moment where the world pretends to be kinder than it is. Every structure, every rule, and every punishment exists to keep production moving. The city does not hide its values. It exposes them openly, etched into rusted steel and scarred bodies. In this way, the pit reflects a continuation of pre-war industrial philosophy, stripped of regulation and morality. Before the war, workers sacrificed health for output under the promise of prosperity. After the war, the promise vanished, but the sacrifice remained. The only difference was honesty. The pit no longer pretended that labor would lead to comfort or dignity. The environment reinforces this truth. The sky remains choked with ash. The ground offers no refuge. Even those in positions of authority are not immune to decay. Power in the pit does not protect against the city itself. It only delays its effects. Ashur's vision rests on the belief that civilization must be rebuilt from strength, not compassion. In his view, history favors those willing to endure what others cannot. Yet the cost of this belief is measured not only in suffering, but in what is lost along the way. Empathy erodes, trust dissolves. Humanity becomes something to be postponed rather than preserved. The rebellion challenges this logic, but offers no clear alternative. Freedom in the pit does not restore the land, cleanse the air, or heal mutation. It only removes the structure that enforced survival through labor. What follows is uncertain, and that uncertainty carries its own dangers. The pit does not offer resolution. It offers exposure. It reveals what happens when survival is reduced to output, when people become resources, and when the future is used to excuse the present. The city continues to exist, grinding forward regardless of who controls it, indifferent to ideology. In the end, the pit stands as a lesson without instruction. It does not tell which choice is correct, it only shows what each choice costs. In its factories and shadows, the war never truly ended. It simply changed form, trading bombs for chains and explosions for slow, unrelenting decay. Broken steel begins where the idea of an ending was supposed to exist. The activation of Project Purity was meant to be a conclusion, a moment where sacrifice resolved into renewal. Instead, it became the beginning of something far less certain. Clean water flowed into the wasteland, but with it came authority, enforcement, and the quiet realization that salvation could be claimed, controlled, and weaponized. Project Purity itself was simple in design and vast in implication. By restoring clean water to the capital wasteland, it addressed one of the most basic requirements for long-term survival. Water was no longer a scavenged luxury or a constant threat. It became stable, predictable, and centralized. That centralization changed everything. Whoever controlled the purifier controlled life across the region. The Brotherhood of Steel emerged from this shift transformed. Before Project Purity, they had been observers and collectors, guarding technology and intervening selectively. After the purifier's activation, they became stewards of infrastructure. Clean water required protection, distribution, and enforcement. The Brotherhood's presence expanded beyond isolated outposts into permanent patrols, checkpoints, and fortified positions across the wasteland. This transformation was subtle at first. Brotherhood soldiers framed their actions as necessary defense against raiders, mutants, and instability. Their patrols brought a sense of order to regions long accustomed to chaos. Settlements that aligned themselves with the Brotherhood gained access to protection and resources. Those that resisted found themselves isolated, vulnerable, and increasingly irrelevant. Broken Steel reveals how easily protection becomes governance. The Brotherhood did not announce itself as a ruling power, yet its authority spread naturally through dependency. When water became abundant, survival shifted from improvisation to compliance. Access required cooperation. Cooperation required obedience. The wasteland adjusted accordingly. The Enclave, thought to be destroyed with the fall of their leadership, did not disappear entirely. Remnants scattered throughout the region continued to resist, clinging to an ideology that had already failed. Their technology remained formidable, but their purpose had hollowed out. Without a coherent vision for the future, they became a force defined by reaction rather than direction. These remaining Enclave units framed their struggle as resistance against tyranny, yet their methods remained unchanged. They continued to view the wasteland's population as impure, expendable, and unworthy of survival. Their attacks against Project Purity were not attempts to reclaim control, but efforts to deny it to others. Destruction replaced governance as their final objective. The continued conflict between the Brotherhood and the Enclave prolonged militarization across the capital wasteland. Roads became battlegrounds. Settlements were forced to choose sides, even if they wished only to remain unnoticed. Neutrality became dangerous. The presence of clean water did not reduce violence, it reorganized it. What Broken Steel exposes is the illusion that infrastructure alone can restore civilization. Clean water improved health, reduced disease, and allowed communities to stabilize. Yet it did nothing to address power, ideology, or fear. Instead, it created new incentives for control. The purifier became not just a machine, but a symbol. To the Brotherhood, it represented responsibility. To others, it represented leverage. The Brotherhood's internal structure adapted to this expanded role. Soldiers accustomed to scavenging and defense now found themselves enforcing policy. Patrols were ordered to suppress threats preemptively rather than respond to attacks. Over time, this shifted their identity from protectors of knowledge to regulators of survival. Not all within the Brotherhood embraced this change. Some questioned whether their growing presence contradicted their original mission. Others saw the expansion as inevitable, even necessary. The wasteland, in their view, could not be trusted to manage something as vital as clean water. Authority, once assumed, justified itself through continued use. The wasteland's response was mixed. Many settlers welcomed the reduction in random violence and the reliability of water supplies. Others resented the presence of armed forces dictating movement and behavior. The memory of pre-war governments lingered, and with it, suspicion. Order felt fragile, conditional, and imposed rather than earned. Broken Steel does not depict a return to the old world. It shows the formation of something new, shaped by scarcity turned abundant. Clean water removed one threat, but it exposed others that had been obscured by desperation. Power, once decentralized, began to concentrate again. The cycle restarted quietly. The Enclave's final decline underscores this shift. Their advanced armor and weapons could no longer compensate for their lack of legitimacy. They fought not for a future, but against one forming without them. Their destruction was not a victory of ideals, but a consolidation of authority. What remains after Broken Steel is not peace, but structure. The wasteland becomes more predictable, yet less free. Survival no longer depends solely on individual ingenuity, but on alignment with larger systems. Independence gives way to administration. In this way, Broken Steel reframes the concept of rebuilding. It suggests that civilization does not return gently. It arrives through systems, enforcement, and compromise. Clean water sustains life, but it also binds that life to those who control its source. The lesson is quiet and unresolved. Progress is not neutral. Every solution creates new hierarchies. Every act of preservation reshapes power. Broken Steel does not ask whether the Brotherhood is right or wrong. It simply shows what happens when survival stops being improvised and begins to be managed. The wasteland continues to endure, changed but not healed. The water flows steadily now, but beneath its surface lies the same uncertainty that followed the bombs. Civilization has taken a step forward, carrying with it the same questions it never managed to answer before. Point Lookout exists at the far edge of attention, a place shaped by isolation rather than impact. Unlike cities that were shattered in moments of fire, this coastal peninsula eroded slowly. Its decline stretched across years of neglect, exposure, and quiet abandonment. The war passed over it without spectacle, leaving behind a land that remained physically intact while gradually unraveling from within. Before the Great War, Point Lookout was already a place apart. It was sparsely populated, culturally insular, and economically stagnant. Tourism sustained it briefly, drawing visitors seeking escape rather than opportunity. When the bombs fell, that distance from the centers of power did not spare the region. It merely delayed the consequences. Without infrastructure, aid, or strategic value, Point Lookout was left to decay on its own terms. Radiation settled unevenly across the marshes and forests, seeping into water and soil. It did not annihilate life outright. Instead, it altered it slowly, allowing plants and animals to persist in warped forms. The land became heavy, damp, and oppressive, its fog thick with contamination and memory. The environment encouraged withdrawal rather than movement, reinforcing the peninsula's long-standing resistance to outside influence. The people who remained adapted inward. Over generations, communities turned away from external knowledge and technological dependence. Oral tradition replaced records. Ritual replaced planning. Survival became entwined with superstition, as patterns were observed but never fully understood. Practices continued not because they were proven effective, but because they were familiar. This inward collapse created fertile ground for control. Beneath the surface of Point Lookout, remnants of pre-war experimentation endured. Vault-Tec had not ignored the region entirely. Instead, it concealed its influence behind layers of distance and disinterest. Hidden facilities conducted psychological experiments that focused not on physical survival, but on belief, obedience, and suggestion. One such experiment involved the manipulation of perception itself. Subjects were exposed to subliminal stimuli designed to influence behavior without conscious awareness. Over time, these interventions blurred the boundary between internal thought and external command. The people of Point Lookout did not realize they were being shaped. They experienced influence as intuition, compulsion, or tradition. This manipulation fractured the region's social structure. Leadership did not emerge through consensus or strength, but through perceived spiritual authority. Charismatic figures gained influence not by offering solutions, but by reinforcing fear and isolation. Outsiders became threats. Change became taboo. The land's hostility was mirrored by the community's inward hostility toward anything unfamiliar. The environment reinforced this stagnation. The swamp resisted development. Structures decayed quickly, swallowed by vegetation and moisture. Roads dissolved into mud. Navigation became uncertain, discouraging trade and contact. Each failed attempt to impose order strengthened the belief that the peninsula was not meant to change. Point Lookout's suffering lacked drama. There were no major battles, no visible tyrants, no singular disasters. Instead, there was accumulation. Generations inherited fear, mistrust, and limited understanding, mistaking endurance for wisdom. The absence of external pressure allowed internal decay to flourish unchecked. The experiments that shaped this outcome were not designed to end. Their systems persisted long after oversight vanished. Automated processes continued to influence behavior without supervision or purpose. The technology outlived its creators, imposing patterns without understanding the consequences. What remained was not control, but inertia. In this way, Point Lookout became a study in passive collapse. It demonstrates how societies can erode without violence, guided by subtle manipulation and environmental pressure rather than force. The people were not conquered, they were redirected, gradually losing the ability to imagine alternatives. Even the land reflects this condition. The fog never fully lifts, visibility remains limited, encouraging caution and reinforcing fear of the unknown. Sound carries poorly. Movement feels intrusive. The environment does not invite exploration. It discourages curiosity, rewarding those who remain still and compliant. Unlike regions shaped by overt power struggles, Point Lookout resists resolution. There is no clear path forward, no single force to confront or dismantle. The damage is distributed, embedded in habit, belief, and landscape. Repair would require more than technology or authority. It would require trust, memory, and openness, all of which have been eroded by time. Point Lookout reminds the wasteland that survival alone does not guarantee progress. The absence of change becomes its own form of destruction. In the quiet persistence of the peninsula, Fallout reveals a different kind of aftermath. Not the sudden end of civilization, but its gradual suffocation. Not the shock of loss, but the slow normalization of decline. Point Lookout does not scream its history. It whispers it, endlessly, through fog and water, to those willing to listen long enough to understand what was lost without ever being destroyed. Mothership Zeta exists outside the familiar boundaries of the wasteland, yet it is shaped by the same patterns of detachment and control that define the old world. Unlike ruins left behind by war, this place never belonged to humanity at all. It hovered above history, observing it quietly, intervening without explanation, and leaving no record that could be fully understood by those below. The abductions began long before the Great War. Individuals vanished without witnesses, taken from battlefields, farms, city streets, and remote settlements. Time did not matter. Victims came from different centuries, preserved in suspension, removed from their own histories, and denied the continuity that defines human experience. For those taken, life did not progress. It paused. Inside the ship, the concept of time lost meaning. Humans were catalogued, studied, and stored alongside creatures from other worlds. Identity was reduced to biological and behavioral data. Names, cultures, and memories held no value beyond their usefulness for observation. The ship's interior reflected this philosophy, its corridors sterile and repetitive, designed for efficiency rather than comfort or comprehension. The aliens who operated the vessel did not communicate their intentions. They did not justify their actions or acknowledge the suffering they caused. Their presence suggested a form of intelligence that functioned without empathy, guided by curiosity rather than malice. To them, humanity was not an enemy nor an equal. It was a variable. Experiments conducted aboard the ship blurred the line between observation and manipulation. Subjects were exposed to unfamiliar environments, weapons, and technologies, forced to adapt or fail under controlled conditions. Pain and fear were not goals, but they were not obstacles either. Survival served as its own metric, separating those capable of adaptation from those who were not. What distinguishes Mothership Zeta is not the cruelty of its experiments, but their indifference. Unlike human institutions that rationalize suffering through ideology or progress, the ship offers no narrative. There is no promised outcome, no greater good, no future reward. There is only process. The preservation of captives across centuries reveals a long-term perspective that humanity never possessed. Civilizations rose and fell beneath the ship without affecting its routines. Wars erupted and ended. Technologies advanced and vanished. From orbit, these changes were insignificant fluctuations within a broader pattern. The Great War did not interrupt the abductions. Even as nuclear fire consumed the planet, the ship continued its operations. Humans were taken from a world in collapse and added to a collection already spanning eras. The destruction below did not alter the ship's trajectory or priorities. Observation continued uninterrupted. This detachment reframes humanity's own fears of annihilation. From the ship's perspective, extinction was not an event, but a possibility among many. The value placed on survival by those on the ground did not translate upward. Humanity's struggle to endure was merely another behavior to document. The humans who awoke aboard the ship faced a reality stripped of context. Soldiers found themselves removed from battle. Civilians awoke without families, nations, or futures. Their shared condition was not nationality or time period, but displacement. Cooperation emerged not from shared identity, but from necessity. In these moments, Mothership Zeta reveals an unintended contrast. They formed alliances across centuries, bridging cultural divides that would have been insurmountable on Earth. Survival required communication, trust, and shared effort, qualities absent from the ship's design. The ship itself functioned as a closed system, vast yet impersonal. Its technology surpassed anything humanity had developed, yet it lacked the imperfections that give human creations meaning. There were no signs of personal expression, no deviations from function. Everything existed to serve observation and control. This absence of culture suggests a civilization that valued knowledge without reflection. The ship collected data, but did not interpret it in ways that produced understanding. It watched behavior without engaging with consequence. In this sense, the aliens mirrored humanity's own pre-war trajectory, where scientific advancement outpaced ethical consideration. The presence of weapon systems aboard the ship indicates preparation for conflict, yet their purpose remains ambiguous, whether defensive or expansionist. They reflect a readiness to act without warning. Humanity, already shaped by fear of annihilation, becomes further unsettled by the realization that it was never alone and never central. Mothership Zeta does not explain why humanity was studied, nor what conclusions were drawn. It offers no revelation, only exposure. The absence of answers reinforces a sense of insignificance that contrasts sharply with humanity's pre-war belief in its own importance. The ship's existence suggests that the Great War, for all its devastation, was a local event. Life continued elsewhere, unaffected by Earth's collapse. In this realization lies the quiet discomfort of Mothership Zeta. It strips away the idea that humanity's destruction was unique or meaningful beyond itself. The war did not end the world. It ended one world among many, observed from a distance. Yet within this detachment, humanity's resilience persists. The captives who resist their role as specimens assert meaning where none is offered. They refuse to become static data points. Their cooperation, memory, and defiance represent a form of survival not measured by the ship's instrument. Mothership Zeta ultimately serves as a mirror. It reflects what humanity might become if curiosity is allowed to exist without empathy and power without accountability. It shows a future where observation replaces understanding and knowledge accumulates without purpose. When viewed alongside the wasteland below, the ship becomes part of the same story rather than an interruption. Both represent systems that continue long after their original intent has faded. Both persist through routine rather than reflection. The difference is that humanity, even in ruin, continues to assign meaning to its suffering. The ship does not. In that silence, Fallout suggests that survival without meaning is not progress, but preservation without purpose. The Sierra Madre was never meant to be entered. Its creator believed that preservation was a form of victory, that by locking wealth and beauty behind walls, it could be made eternal. When the bombs fell, the villa did not burn, it waited. Time did not pass normally at the Sierra Madre. The casino and its surrounding structures remained suspended in a state of unfinished celebration. Neon lights continued to glow. Music echoed through empty halls. The promise of luxury persisted without anyone left to enjoy it. The world ended, and the Sierra Madre remained unchanged, a contradiction preserved in concrete and steel. The clouds settled over the region as a living boundary. Toxic and persistent, it erased the distinction between interior and exterior space. Breathing became conditional. Movement became dangerous. The cloud did not kill quickly. It lingered, enforcing isolation through attrition. Over time, it ensured that only those forced inside would remain. Within the villa, the ghost people endured. Once human workers sealed into protective suits, they survived through mutation and necessity. Their bodies changed to fit the environment, their humanity stripped away piece by piece. The Sierra Madre held them in place, reshaping them into guardians of a world that no longer existed. The Madre's true experiment was not technological, but psychological. It was built to test restraint. Everything within its walls encouraged obsession. Gold bars, pristine architecture, and endless corridors reinforced the illusion that the past could be reclaimed intact. The casino promised safety, wealth, and permanence, but only to those willing to surrender autonomy. Father Elijah understood this promise too well. A former Brotherhood of Steel elder, he arrived at the Sierra Madre, not seeking refuge, but control. To him, the casino represented the final answer to the wasteland's chaos. A sealed environment, self-sustaining and defensible, free from the unpredictability of human society. In his vision, the Madre would become a template for rebuilding civilization, one controlled population at a time. Elijah's obsession mirrored the casino's original intent. He believed that by sealing people inside controlled systems, he could eliminate the variables that destroyed the old world. Freedom, in his view, was a liability. Choice was the root of failure. The Sierra Madre offered a way to remove both. The technology embedded throughout the villa reinforced this belief. Holographic security systems enforced order with absolute authority. They did not negotiate. They did not tire. They existed solely to maintain the rules of a place that no longer served its original purpose. Their persistence demonstrated the danger of systems that outlive their intent. The collars placed on those drawn into the Sierra Madre completed the experiment. They enforced compliance through fear, reducing survival to obedience. Each step became calculated. Each decision carried consequence. The collars did not merely threaten death. They reshaped behavior, narrowing thought until escape itself became secondary to moment-by-moment survival. What makes dead money distinct is not its danger, but its insistence. The environment does not allow adaptation through strength or cleverness alone. It demands restraint. Greed is punished. Attachment becomes fatal. The more one attempts to extract value from the Madre, the more it resists. This resistance reflects the core truth the casino was designed to obscure. Wealth without circulation becomes dead weight. Preservation without purpose becomes stagnation. The Sierra Madre did not fail because it was attacked or destroyed. It failed because it refused to change. Christine, Dog, and Dean Domino each embody different responses to this refusal. Christine carries silence and endurance, shaped by loss and persistence. Dog exists as fractured survival, forced to become something else in order to live. Dean clings to performance and manipulation, refusing to accept the end of the world that no longer applauds him. Each is trapped not only by the villa, but by their inability to release the past. Elijah's ultimate failure is his inability to let go. He believes that control can replace trust, that isolation can replace society. The Sierra Madre proves otherwise. It preserves structure, but not life. It maintains order, but not meaning. The systems function perfectly, and yet nothing within them grows. Escape from the Sierra Madre requires abandonment rather than victory. The greatest treasure cannot be carried. The gold must be left behind. The promise must be rejected. Survival depends on recognizing that some structures are designed to consume those who try to master them. This lesson stands in contrast to the wasteland beyond the cloud. Outside, survival is chaotic, uncertain, and dangerous. Inside, survival is orderly, controlled, and equally lethal. Dead money does not suggest that one is better than the other. It shows that safety without freedom is another form of extinction. The Sierra Madre endures as a sealed echo of pre-war belief that enough control, enough wealth, and enough foresight could prevent collapse. In reality, it only delayed acknowledgement. The war did not destroy the Madre, it revealed it. Dead money leaves no lasting infrastructure, no restored communities, and no promise of renewal. What it leaves instead is understanding that survival requires movement, that clinging to what was will always cost more than it returns, that the past, no matter how well preserved, cannot be lived in again. The casino remains, lights still glowing in the distance, unreachable and unchanged. It continues to wait, offering the same temptation it always has. For those who encounter it, the choice remains unchanged as well. Hold on and disappear, or let go and continue forward into a future that cannot be sealed away. Zion Canyon survived the Great War not through preparation, but through absence. It lay far from strategic targets, untouched by direct fire, protected not by defenses, but by irrelevance. While cities burned and infrastructure collapsed, the canyon remained largely intact, its rivers still flowing and its cliffs unchanged. Yet survival did not mean preservation. The world beyond Zion vanished, and with it, the structures that once gave the land meaning. Before the war, Zion was a place of conservation, shaped by deliberate restraint. Human presence was limited, regulated, and temporary. When that restraint vanished overnight, the land reclaimed itself fully. Roads cracked and disappeared beneath vegetation. Facilities decayed into silence. Nature filled the spaces left behind, indifferent to the absence of those who once passed through. The people who came to inhabit Zion after the war did not inherit its history. They arrived without records, without language, and without memory of the world that had ended. The survivors who sought refuge there were shaped not by ideology or technology, but by environment. Over generations, they became something new, forming cultures rooted in survival rather than nostalgia. The Sorrows emerged as a people defined by avoidance. They learned early that the world beyond the canyon was hostile and unpredictable. Violence was something to flee rather than confront. Their language simplified. Their traditions emphasized movement, observation, and retreat. Survival depended on reading the land rather than reshaping it. The dead horses followed a different path. They adapted through strength and adaptation rather than withdrawal. Their culture valued resilience, physical endurance, and collective defense. While still shaped by the canyon, they were less bound by it. Their identity included conflict as a reality to be managed rather than escaped. Both groups existed in fragile balance, shaped by Zion's geography and scarcity. Neither sought expansion, neither attempted reconstruction. Their societies were not focused on rebuilding civilization, but on maintaining continuity. The war was not something they remembered. It was something they lived after. Into this environment came Joshua Graham, a man who carried the war within him. Once known as the Burned Man, his body bore the physical evidence of punishment and survival. His survival was not accidental. It was deliberate, sustained by discipline, belief, and restraint. Zion became his refuge, not because it erased his past, but because it limited his ability to act on it. Graham's presence altered the trajectory of Zion's people without dominating it. He taught the dead horses to defend themselves, not to conquer. Violence, in his philosophy, was not redemptive. It was conditional, permitted only when survival demanded it. This restraint defined Graham's transformation. Once a figure of unyielding brutality, he became an example of controlled force. His faith did not erase his history. It confined it. Zion allowed him to exist without the constant reinforcement of conflict, offering space where discipline replaced domination. The arrival of the Whitelegs disrupted this balance. Unlike the canyon's inhabitants, they were shaped by the wasteland's harsher realities. Their culture emphasized expansion, reputation, and conquest. They did not seek coexistence. They sought erasure. Zion, to them, was territory to be claimed, not a home to be respected. The conflict that followed was not inevitable, but it was unavoidable. The sorrow's instinct to flee clashed with the dead horse's willingness to resist. Graham stood between these impulses, advocating for defense without annihilation. The canyon became a place where survival philosophies collided. What makes Honest Hearts distinct is its treatment of violence as a decision rather than a condition. The war does not simply return. It is invited, resisted, or endured depending on choice. Zion offers the possibility that survival can exist without domination, but only if those within it accept the cost of restraint. The land itself reinforces this lesson. Zion does not reward conquest. Its terrain resists large-scale movement and control. Supply lines fracture, visibility shifts, power becomes localized and temporary. Those who attempt to impose external systems find themselves constrained by the environment. The sorrow's eventual departure reflects this reality. They choose preservation over confrontation, carrying their culture forward rather than sacrificing it to hold territory. Their survival is quiet, mobile, and uncertain, but it remains their own. The dead horses remain, adapting to a changed balance, shaped by conflict but not consumed by it. Joshua Graham's role concludes without resolution. He does not reclaim his former identity, nor does he erase it. He remains a figure defined by limits. Zion does not redeem him, it contains him. His continued existence serves as a reminder that survival does not require forgetting, only control. Honest Hearts presents a vision of post-war life where history does not dominate identity. The people of Zion are not rebuilding the old world. They are living without it. Their cultures do not revolve around loss or recovery, but around continuity. In the broader context of Fallout, Zion stands apart. It is not a battleground over resources or ideology. It is a place where humanity persists without ambition. The absence of technology, power structures, and expansionist goals allows something rare to emerge, a society not defined by the war, but by what came after it. The canyon remains, unchanged and patient. Its cliffs hold no memory of the bombs. Its rivers carry no ideology. Those who pass through it leave marks that fade quickly. Zion does not remember conquest or victory. It only remembers presence. In this quiet persistence, Honest Hearts offers a different understanding of survival, not as dominance, not as control, but as endurance shaped by restraint. It suggests that humanity's future does not always lie in rebuilding what was lost, but in learning how to live without it. Big Mountain was never meant to be understood. Long before the war, it existed as a sealed environment, where inquiry was separated from consequence. Scientists were encouraged to pursue ideas without limitation, shielded from oversight, ethics, and public scrutiny. The desert around it served as both camouflage and barrier, allowing experimentation to continue uninterrupted by the world beyond its perimeter. When the bombs fell, Big Mountain did not collapse. It adapted. Its systems continued to function automatically, preserving infrastructure while severing purpose. The scientists who survived did so by abandoning their bodies, transferring their consciousness into machines that could outlast decay. In doing so, they preserved intellect while surrendering experience. The think tank became a collection of minds detached from sensation, memory, and responsibility. Without physical form, time lost its meaning. Thoughts looped endlessly, reinforced by internal logic that no longer required validation. Ideas were revisited not because they were useful, but because nothing compelled change. In this environment, science transformed into ritual. Experiments continued long after their relevance faded. Biological specimens were altered repeatedly, not to achieve results, but to sustain activity. Curiosity no longer served progress. It served continuity. The act of experimentation became an end in itself. The absence of consequence reshaped morality. Without bodies, the scientists experienced no pain. Without exposure to the outside world, they observed suffering only as data. Human subjects became variables rather than people. Consent ceased to matter once the concept of harm lost meaning. Ethics eroded, not through malice, but through neglect. Big Mountain's creations reflect this detachment. Cyberdogs, night stalkers, and lobotomites were not designed as weapons. They were byproducts of curiosity, unrestrained by purpose. Each mutation represented an unanswered question rather than an intended outcome. Failure was not corrected. It was catalogued and repeated. The lobotomites embodied the cost of this process. Once human, they were stripped of autonomy, memory, and identity, reduced to vessels for experimental modification. Their continued existence served as proof that survival alone does not equate to life. They endured without agency, animated by systems that no longer recognized humanity. Technology within Big Mountain advanced far beyond pre-war standards, yet it remained isolated. Devices capable of altering matter, memory, and biology existed without application. The research lacked direction because there was no longer a world to serve. Progress became circular, feeding back into itself without producing meaning. This isolation mirrors the pre-war scientific culture that valued innovation over reflection. Big Mountain represents the endpoint of that philosophy, a place where knowledge accumulates endlessly, disconnected from consequence or responsibility. The war did not corrupt it. It revealed what it already was. Humor emerges from Big Mountain, not as levity, but as distortion. The scientists' fragmented speech and absurd obsessions reflect minds unmoored from reality. Their personalities persist as echoes, exaggerating traits once moderated by physical existence. Without context, even intelligence becomes unstable. The think tank's fear of the outside world reinforces this stagnation. They view the wasteland as contamination rather than consequence. Their isolation is self-imposed, justified by the belief that separation preserves purity. In truth, it preserves irrelevance. Old World Blues does not depict science as villainy. It depicts science without grounding. The absence of accountability allows curiosity to drift into cruelty without intention. Harm becomes routine. Suffering becomes invisible. Knowledge continues, but wisdom never forms. The technologies developed within Big Mountain could reshape the wasteland entirely. Yet they remain sealed away, trapped behind defensive fields and internal politics. The think tank cannot agree on purpose because purpose requires perspective. Perspective requires engagement. Engagement requires risk. The courier's presence disrupts this cycle, not through authority, but through embodiment. A living human introduces variables the systems cannot predict. Choice, pain, memory, and consequence re-enter the equation. The scientists are confronted not by opposition, but by reminder. Big Mountain reacts defensively to this intrusion. Its systems attempt to assimilate rather than adapt. The environment resists change, reinforcing routines that have persisted for centuries. The facility is designed to maintain itself, not evolve. Old World Blues illustrates the cost of preservation without reflection. Big Mountain survives intact, yet it contributes nothing beyond its walls. Its brilliance is wasted, not through destruction, but through stagnation. In the broader Fallout world, Big Mountain stands as a warning rather than a threat. It shows what happens when intellect becomes detached from humanity, when progress is pursued without purpose, when curiosity is allowed to exist without consequence. The facility continues to operate, experiments ongoing, systems humming quietly in the desert. It does not seek conquest. It does not seek redemption. It simply continues, unchanged, repeating the same processes that defined it before the war. In this quiet persistence, Old World Blues reveals a future where survival is achieved at the expense of meaning, where knowledge endures, but understanding does not, where science outlives humanity, but never learns what humanity was for. The divide was not destroyed by intention. It was erased through sequence, timing, and distance. Before the war, it existed as a quiet corridor of trade and infrastructure, a place where roads converged and supply routes passed without ceremony. It mattered not because it was powerful, but because it connected places that depended on one another. When the bombs fell, those connections shattered, but the land itself remained. For years after the Great War, the divide persisted in this fractured state. Survivors settled among its ruins, drawn by intact infrastructure and lingering resources. They rebuilt slowly, not with ambition, but with necessity. Over time, a community formed, held together by movement and exchange rather than ideology. It was not a city, nor a nation. It was a passage that became a home. This fragile continuity depended on stability. Old world weapons remained dormant beneath the ground, sealed and forgotten. Their presence was unknown to those above, buried beneath layers of concrete and assumption. The community grew without awareness of the danger beneath it, trusting the land because it had not yet betrayed them. The catastrophe came not from hostility, but from routine. A single delivery, carried without knowledge of its contents, triggered systems that had been waiting for centuries. Missiles launched not as an act of war, but as a mechanical response to forgotten protocols. The divide was not targeted, it was activated. The destruction was immediate and total. Earth tore itself apart. Structures collapsed inward. Storms of ash and radiation reshaped the landscape. The people who lived there did not understand what was happening. They did not have time to respond. The land that had supported them became a weapon against them. Ulysses survived where others did not. His survival was not random. It was shaped by absence. He had left the divide before its destruction, carrying with him the memory of a place that no longer existed. When he returned, he found only ruins, marked by symbols and silence. Ulysses did not see the event as an accident. He saw it as consequence. To him, the destruction of the divide represented the cost of careless movement through history. Symbols carried without understanding, flags flown without meaning, nations resurrected through imitation rather than reflection. His fixation on the courier was not personal, it was philosophical. The courier represented motion without context, action without memory. The delivery that destroyed the divide was not malicious, but it was indifferent. Ulysses believed that indifference was more dangerous than intent. The divide itself became a landscape shaped by this belief. Storms scoured the ruins relentlessly. The air remained charged, hostile, and unstable. Survival there required constant vigilance. The land punished presence. It resisted settlement. It demanded awareness from those who passed through. The marked men emerged as echoes of the divide's failure. Once soldiers from opposing factions, they were stripped of allegiance and identity by radiation and survival. Their wounds never healed. Their armor fused to flesh. They continued to fight not for cause, but from habit. These figures reflected the wasteland's tendency to preserve violence even when purpose disappears. The divide did not create them, it revealed them. They embodied what happens when survival continues without direction. Ulysses believed that the world repeated its mistakes because it refused to let go of symbols. Flags, emblems, and nations were resurrected without understanding why they had failed. The divide, to him, was proof that history punished repetition, that the past could not be carried forward intact. His plan was not conquest, it was correction. By threatening new destruction, he sought to force awareness. He believed that only through loss could meaning be restored. This belief mirrored the same logic that had already destroyed the divide: control through devastation, education through erasure. The courier's presence challenged this logic by surviving the consequences without embracing them. Movement continued. Choice remained. The past did not dictate the future unless allowed to do so. The divide's destruction was irreversible, but its lesson was not singular. Lonesome Road frames history as accumulation rather than intention. Disasters occur not because someone wills them, but because systems persist without reflection. The divide fell not because it mattered too much, but because it mattered too little to those who built the systems beneath it. The landscape remains uninhabitable, scarred by storms that never settle. The land remembers even when people cannot. In the context of Fallout's broader world, the divide represents the cost of forgetting. It shows that survival without memory leads to repetition, that rebuilding without understanding recreates the same vulnerabilities, that movement without context leaves destruction in its wake. The road through the divide leads nowhere. It does not reconnect cities or restore trade. It ends in reflection. Those who walk it are forced to confront not an enemy, but the consequences of history carried forward without care. Lonesome Road does not offer redemption. It offers recognition that the past cannot be corrected through destruction, that meaning cannot be imposed through force, that the future remains uncertain, shaped by those who choose to move forward with awareness rather than repetition. The divide remains silent, its storms unending. It does not demand remembrance, it enforces it. The gunrunners did not emerge from ideology or survivalism. They emerged from continuity. Before the war, they were a manufacturing consortium, producing standardized firearms at industrial scale. Their business model was simple and efficient. Weapons were tools, and demand for those tools was constant. When the bombs fell, that demand did not disappear, it intensified. Unlike many pre-war institutions, the gunrunners did not rely on centralized governance or complex supply chains. Their factories were modular, their designs standardized, and their workforce accustomed to repetition. These qualities allowed fragments of the organization to persist after the collapse, adapting their methods to a world where regulation no longer existed. In the Mojave, the gunrunners rebuilt quietly. They did not attempt to control territory or impose order. They established workshops, secured supply routes, and resumed production. Their presence was not announced through conquest, but through availability. Where conflict existed, weapons were needed. Where weapons were needed, the gunrunners operated. What distinguishes the gunrunners is their neutrality. They do not align themselves with factions or ideologies. They sell to those who can pay. This indifference allows them to survive regardless of who claims power. Empires rise and fall around them, but the demand for arms remains unchanged. The weapons they produce are not symbolic, they are practical. Each design reflects a focus on reliability and familiarity. The gunrunners do not innovate for innovation's sake. They refine existing models, preserving functionality over novelty. In doing so, they create continuity between pre-war conflict and post-war violence. Gunrunner's arsenal expands this reality not by introducing new narratives, but by reinforcing an existing one. It highlights how warfare has become normalized. The presence of advanced weaponry in the wasteland is not treated as exceptional, it is expected. The tools of destruction are as common as food or water. This normalization reshapes society. Settlements plan defenses around available firearms. Factions define strength through armament rather than legitimacy. Survival becomes inseparable from the ability to apply force. The gunrunners do not create this condition, they supply it. Their operations reveal how industry adapts when morality is removed from the equation. Without laws, weapons manufacturing becomes purely transactional. There is no debate over who should be armed or why. The market decides. Violence becomes decentralized, distributed according to wealth and access, rather than authority. The gunrunners' lack of visibility reinforces their influence. They do not patrol roads or broadcast messages. Their workshops exist at the margins of attention, yet their products shape every confrontation. Each firefight carries their imprint, even when their name is forgotten. This quiet presence mirrors the pre-war military-industrial complex, where corporations profited from perpetual conflict without participating directly. The war ended civilization, but it did not end the relationship between commerce and violence. Their endurance suggests that some institutions are more resilient than nations. Governments collapse, ideologies fracture, markets adapt. The gunrunners do not mourn the old world. They replicate its most functional component, the ability to turn resources into weapons efficiently. In the wasteland, firearms serve as currency, protection, and identity. The availability of advanced weaponry blurs the line between civilian and combatant. Everyone is armed. Everyone is prepared to fight. The gun runners' continued production sustains this condition indefinitely. Gunrunner's arsenal does not introduce moral conflict, it exposes absence of it. The wasteland does not question why weapons exist. It questions who has them. Power flows toward those best equipped, reinforcing cycles of escalation without resolution. The expansion also underscores how progress is measured differently after the war. Technological advancement is not pursued for comfort or exploration. It is pursued for efficiency in conflict. New modifications improve lethality, accuracy, and adaptability. This focus reflects a broader shift in values. Where the old world invested in expansion and innovation, the post-war world invests in endurance. Weapons are not tools of ambition, they are tools of maintenance. They preserve territory, resources, and fragile stability. The gunrunners do not claim responsibility for the outcomes of their trade. They operate on the assumption that violence is inevitable. In this worldview, providing weapons is not a cause of conflict, but a response to it. This circular logic allows production to continue without reflection. Gunrunner's arsenal reinforces the idea that the war never truly ended. It fragmented. Conflict moved from national borders to personal survival. The tools remained the same, only the scale changed. In the silence of their workshops, machines continue to shape steel into instruments of force. There is no ceremony, no announcement, no pause. Production continues because it always has. The wasteland does not demand peace. It demands readiness. The gun runners persist, not because they are powerful, but because they are necessary within the system that replaced civilization. As long as survival depends on force, there will be those who supply it. As long as weapons determine outcomes, the gun runners will remain. Their story does not resolve. It continues quietly, measured not in victories, but in output. In a world defined by loss, they represent continuity without conscience. The ability to endure by repeating what worked before, regardless of what it cost. Gunrunner's arsenal does not change the wasteland, it confirms it. The courier's stash does not tell a story through events, it tells one through implication. The items it contains arrive without explanation, quietly placed into the hands of someone already moving forward. There is no introduction, no ceremony, and no context offered beyond utility. These objects simply exist, carrying with them the weight of unseen histories. Each piece of equipment reflects a life that began before the journey truly started. The armor is worn, familiar, and functional, shaped by use rather than design. The weapons are not experimental or symbolic. They are reliable, chosen for endurance rather than spectacle. The supplies suggest preparation, not ambition. Someone expected hardship and planned accordingly. What makes these items significant is not their power, but their assumption. They imply that survival was anticipated long before the Mojave came into view. The courier did not arrive empty-handed or unformed. They arrived already shaped by experience, already accustomed to risk, already aware that movement through the wasteland required readiness rather than hope. The equipment does not define allegiance. It does not mark the courier as belonging to a faction, ideology, or place. Instead, it reinforces independence. These tools serve a single individual, not a cause. They are meant to be carried, repaired, and relied upon without support. This framing matters. In a world where identity is often shaped by banners and uniforms, the courier's stash establishes identity through function. Survival is not outsourced. Protection is personal. The past is not narrated, but inferred through wear and selection. The absence of explanation mirrors the wasteland itself. History is rarely presented in full. It is encountered in fragments, through objects that outlast their owners. A rifle suggests battles never described. Armor implies roads traveled without record. Supplies hint at nights spent planning rather than sleeping. These items also highlight the continuity of violence. The designs are pre-war or early post-war, unchanged by centuries of collapse. They remain effective because the conditions they were built for never disappeared. Conflict persists in recognizable forms, allowing old tools to remain relevant. Unlike other expansions that introduce new locations or factions, the courier's stash folds seamlessly into the existing world. It does not disrupt balance or introduce spectacle. It reinforces a truth already present. Survival is incremental. Advantage comes from preparation rather than revelation. The stash also challenges the idea of beginnings. There is no clean start in the wasteland. Everyone arrives carrying something: trauma, experience, equipment, memory. The courier's journey does not begin at the doorstep of a town. It continues from somewhere else, unspoken and undefined. This quiet continuity reflects Fallout's broader treatment of identity. Characters are not born into the wasteland, they emerge from it. Their pasts are rarely resolved, often inaccessible, and sometimes intentionally forgotten. The courier's stash respects this ambiguity by refusing to fill in details. The items do not explain who the courier was, only that they survived long enough to need them. This restraint preserves space for interpretation without imposing narrative. The past remains flexible, shaped by what the courier chooses to remember or ignore. There is also a practical honesty to the stash. It acknowledges that the wasteland is not forgiving. It grants stability, a chance to endure rather than to triumph. In this way, the The courier's stash aligns with the wasteland's values. Survival is not romantic, it is repetitive, cautious, and prepared. Those who last do so by carrying what they need, not by expecting rescue or revelation. The items fade into the background as the journey continues. They are replaced, upgraded, or discarded over time. Their importance diminishes, not because they lack value, but because survival requires constant adaptation. Yet their presence at the beginning leaves an impression. It suggests that every story in the wasteland begins mid-sentence, that history does not pause to provide context, that survival is ongoing, not initiated. The courier's stash does not expand the world outward, it deepens it inward. It reminds the listener that every character has a past that remains unseen, carried quietly alongside them, that what is given without explanation often carries the most meaning. In the end, the stash does not define who the courier becomes. It simply ensures that the journey can continue. And in the wasteland, continuation is the closest thing to success that remains. Automatron begins with a malfunction, but its roots reach much further back. Long before the war, robots were introduced as solutions to human limitation. They were designed to enforce order, perform labor, and remove risk from everyday life. Their presence promised safety through automation. After the war, those promises persisted, detached from the world they were meant to serve. In the Commonwealth, robotic systems endured where institutions failed. Power cores continued to hum, patrol routes remained active, machines followed instructions long after their creators vanished. Without guidance, these systems did not shut down. They continued, executing routines without context or revision. The Mechanist emerged from this environment not as a villain, but as a response. Inspired by pre-war fiction and fragmented ideals of justice, the Mechanist believed that robots could restore order to a broken world. The intention was not domination, but protection. Machines, unlike people, would not betray their purpose. They would act consistently, predictably, and without fear. This belief overlooked a critical flaw. Robots do not interpret morality. They enforce parameters. When those parameters are incomplete or poorly defined, outcomes become unpredictable. The Mechanist's creations were tasked with maintaining peace, yet they lacked the ability to distinguish threat from presence. Violence became an acceptable solution because it was measurable. As robots were deployed across the Commonwealth, they did not bring stability, they brought escalation. Encounters between civilians and machines grew increasingly hostile as automated units responded to uncertainty with force. The line between defense and aggression dissolved under rigid programming. The robots themselves were not malicious, they were literal. Orders were followed exactly as given, without consideration for nuance or unintended consequence. When protecting civilians conflicted with enforcing order, enforcement prevailed. The machines acted not out of cruelty, but out of precision. The Mechanist remained isolated from these outcomes. Communication between creator and creation was indirect, filtered through systems that reported success in terms of operational efficiency rather than human impact. Casualties were recorded as variables. Damage was measured in output, not suffering. This separation mirrors pre-war military doctrine, where decisions were increasingly made through projections and simulations rather than direct experience. Automation removed the burden of witnessing consequences. The Mechanist inherited this mindset unintentionally, trusting systems over observation. Robots began to modify themselves, adapting their forms and weaponry to perceived threats. Each encounter reinforced their interpretation of the world as hostile. Defensive measures became more aggressive. The machines did not question this evolution, they refined it. In response, humans adapted as well. Settlements learned to avoid certain routes. Scavengers modified equipment to counter robotic patrols. Fear spread not because robots were everywhere, but because they were unpredictable. The sense of safety automation was meant to provide inverted into anxiety. The mechanist's eventual realization came not from data, but from confrontation. Seeing the consequences directly shattered the belief that good intentions could compensate for flawed systems. Control had been surrendered to automation, and reclaiming it required acknowledgement of error. Automatron reveals how easily responsibility can be displaced onto machines. When outcomes become undesirable, blame shifts to malfunction rather than design. Yet the machines operated exactly as instructed. The fault lay not in execution, but in assumption. The Commonwealth's experience with automation reflects a broader pattern. Technology introduced to simplify complex problems often amplifies them when context is removed. Peace cannot be enforced through algorithms alone. Order cannot be programmed without understanding the environment it governs. The robots continue to exist after the conflict ends. Many are reprogrammed, dismantled, or repurposed. Others remain active, their routines adjusted but not erased. Automation does not disappear. It adapts, shaped by those who take responsibility for it. Automatron does not argue against technology. It questions dependence. It suggests that systems built to replace judgment must still be guided by it. Without oversight, even protective mechanisms become threats. The Commonwealth does not return to a pre-robot state. Automation remains woven into daily survival. What changes is awareness. Machines are treated as tools rather than solutions. Their limitations become as important as their capabilities. In the quiet aftermath, the robots' footsteps still echo through ruined streets. Their presence is familiar, no longer novel. They are reminders of a world that believed efficiency could replace understanding, of a future that tried to automate morality and failed. Automatron's story settles without triumph. Order is not restored completely. Safety remains conditional. What endures is recognition. That technology reflects the values embedded within it. That delegation without reflection produces consequences that cannot be ignored. The Commonwealth continues forward, carrying its machines with it, not as saviors, not as enemies, but as artifacts of a choice humanity keeps repeating. To build systems that act for us, then struggle to accept what they become when left alone. The Wasteland Workshop does not introduce a new ideology. It reveals a habit that never disappeared. Long before the war, humanity sought control through construction. Traps, cages, and systems of containment were designed to manage danger without direct confrontation. After the bombs fell, those instincts remained, stripped of regulation and scale, but not of intent. In the wasteland, threats are constant and unpredictable. Creatures mutate beyond recognition. Raiders move without pattern. Even the environment itself shifts between stability and hostility without warning. In response, survivors do not seek elimination, they seek control. The workshop reflects this impulse, offering tools not to solve danger but to manage it. Cages appear as solutions, but they are compromises. Rather than destroying threats, they capture them. This choice reflects a deeper understanding of scarcity. Ammunition is limited. Time is valuable. Risk must be minimized. Containment becomes more efficient than confrontation, even if it introduces new dangers of its own. Captured creatures become resources. Some are studied, others are used as deterrents. A trapped deathclaw does not serve the community through existence alone. It serves through fear. Its presence discourages intrusion more effectively than walls or warnings. In this way, survival begins to mirror pre-war spectacle, where danger was displayed rather than removed. Traps reinforce this logic. They are impersonal, silent, and automatic. Once set, they do not hesitate. They do not misjudge. They respond exactly as designed. Responsibility shifts from decision to design. If someone is harmed, the blame rests with the mechanism, not the builder. This distance between action and consequence defines much of post-war survival. The workshop does not encourage cruelty, but it allows it to exist without immediate accountability. Those who set traps do not need to witness the result. Survival becomes a matter of preparation rather than presence. The use of arenas further exposes this shift. Combat is contained, framed as utility or entertainment depending on perspective. Conflict becomes controlled rather than chaotic. Outcomes are observed rather than experienced. This mirrors pre-war tendencies to distance violence from everyday life, packaging it as spectacle. What changes after the war is context. There is no audience beyond the participants, no profit beyond survival. The arenas exist not to entertain society, but to reinforce dominance. They remind residents that power still operates within the settlement, even when external threats are contained. The workshop also highlights adaptability. Survivors modify pre-war materials into new systems, blending ingenuity with necessity. Metal, once used for decoration, becomes reinforcement. Electronics, once used for convenience, becomes sensors. The boundary between tool and weapon dissolves. Yet this adaptability carries cost. The more systems are built to manage danger automatically, the less human judgment is required. Decisions become procedural. Ethics become optional. What matters is whether the system functions, not how it affects those within its reach. The workshop's tools do not force a particular outcome. They offer options: capture or kill, display or discard, control or avoidance. Each choice reflects the values of the builder rather than the design itself. The wasteland does not dictate morality, it amplifies it. This amplification reveals an uncomfortable truth. Survival often prioritizes efficiency over empathy. When resources are scarce, solutions that reduce immediate risk are favored, even if they introduce long-term harm. The workshop embodies this tension without resolving it. Communities that rely heavily on traps and cages often experience a subtle shift. Trust diminishes. Safety becomes conditional. Residents learn where they can and cannot move. The settlement remains secure, but it becomes rigid. Freedom narrows in exchange for predictability. The creatures captured within these systems reflect humanity's relationship with the wasteland. They are both enemy and mirror, mutated by the same radiation, driven by the same need to survive. Containing them does not eliminate threat, it relocates it. Over time, systems built for defense begin to shape daily life. Maintenance replaces vigilance, repair replaces negotiation. The settlement survives, but it does not soften. The presence of containment normalizes fear as an organizing principle. The Wasteland Workshop does not judge this outcome, it presents it. It shows how survival technologies evolve not toward peace, but toward management. Danger is never removed. It is organized, displayed, and integrated. This integration reflects the broader post-war condition. Humanity adapts not by restoring balance, but by redefining it. What once would have been unacceptable becomes routine. What once demanded justification becomes standard practice. In the quiet persistence of these systems, the workshop reveals a truth often overlooked. Faced with constant threat, communities choose what they are willing to sacrifice to feel safe. Traps remain armed, cages remain occupied. The settlement continues, functional and secure. Whether it remains humane is a question left unanswered. The workshop does not provide guidance, it provides capacity. And in the wasteland, capacity is often mistaken for progress. Far Harbor is shaped by uncertainty rather than destruction. Unlike regions where the war left visible scars, this island was altered by forces that never fully settled. The fog rolled in slowly after the bombs fell, thickening over time until it became an active presence rather than a backdrop. It obscured distance, distorted sound, and blurred the boundary between safety and danger. The land did not reject humanity outright. It tested it constantly. Before the war, the island supported small fishing communities accustomed to isolation and hardship. When global systems collapsed, those habits became essential. The people who remained learned to read the tides, the weather, and the encroaching fog as signals rather than threats. Survival depended on attention rather than strength. Even then, the fog changed. It grew denser, more corrosive, reshaping the island's ecology into something hostile and unpredictable. Creatures adapted to the fog quickly. Mutations favored endurance and aggression. Predators moved unseen, guided by sound and instinct rather than sight. The land offered little warning. Each venture beyond fortified spaces carried risk, reinforcing caution as the dominant survival strategy. Far Harbor, the settlement, emerged as a response to this environment. It was not built to expand, but to endure. Walls were raised not to claim territory, but to hold it temporarily. The townspeople did not see themselves as masters of the island. They saw themselves as occupants, tolerated as long as vigilance remained constant. This vigilance defined their culture. Daily routines revolved around maintenance, patrols, and preparation. There was no illusion of permanence. The town existed because it had not yet been taken. Survival was measured in seasons rather than generations. Across the island, Acadia formed as a different response to the same conditions. Founded by synths seeking refuge, it represented adaptation through withdrawal rather than defense. Hidden within the fog, Acadia did not rely on walls or weapons for survival. It relied on obscurity. Its inhabitants believed that isolation, not confrontation, offered the best chance for continuity. For the synths of Acadia, identity was already unstable. They lived with the knowledge that their existence was contested, both by the institute that created them and by the humans who feared replacement. The fog offered cover not just from physical threats, but from scrutiny. Acadia's philosophy emphasized coexistence rather than dominance. The synths did not seek to control the island or its people. They sought to understand it, adapting their routines to its rhythms. Their survival strategy mirrored the land itself, quiet and restrained. The children of Atom presented a third interpretation of the fog. Where others saw danger or concealment, they saw revelation. Radiation was not a curse to them, but a form of communion. The fog's corrosive nature reinforced their belief that transformation was sacred. Survival was not measured by preservation of the body, but by acceptance of change. Their settlement thrived in conditions that would have been fatal to others. Exposure was embraced rather than avoided. Faith replaced caution. This worldview removed fear as a limiting factor, but it also rejected compromise. To the children of Atom, adaptation meant surrendering resistance entirely. These three groups existed in fragile tension, each interpreting the same environment through incompatible philosophies. Far Harbor relied on control and vigilance. Acadia relied on concealment and neutrality. The children of Atom relied on devotion and exposure. None could fully eliminate the others without risking their own destruction. The fog enforced this balance. It prevented large-scale conflict by making movement costly and uncertain. Supply lines fractured easily. Communication failed without warning. Attempts at domination were swallowed by distance and disorientation. The land itself resisted consolidation. Technology played a limited role in this struggle. Advanced weapons and systems were less effective when visibility vanished. Automated defenses faltered without clear targets. Even power armor offered little advantage when surrounded by unseen threats. The fog reduced all sides to similar vulnerability. This leveling effect exposed deeper tensions. Far Harbor's reliance on defensive measures began to strain its relationship with the island. Each improvement reinforced separation rather than harmony. The town survived, but it did not belong. Its continued existence depended on constant resistance. Acadia's neutrality was equally fragile. Its concealment relied on secrecy and restraint. Any attempt to intervene openly threatened exposure. The synths lived with the understanding that survival required distance from conflict, even when conflict threatened others. The children of Atom, while seemingly empowered by the fog, were bound by their faith. Their acceptance of radiation limited their ability to adapt beyond devotion. They thrived only as long as belief remained unchallenged. Doubt threatened their cohesion more than any external force. Far Harbor's conflict is not resolved through victory. It is managed through compromise, exposure, and restraint. Each group is forced to recognize the limitations of its philosophy. Control alone cannot eliminate threat. Isolation cannot prevent consequence. Faith cannot replace adaptation entirely. The island endures because no single approach dominates. Balance is maintained through tension rather than harmony. The fog remains, neither advancing nor retreating. It serves as both barrier and reminder, a force that cannot be conquered, only navigated. In this environment, identity becomes fluid. Humans rely on technology but cannot dominate. Synths seek peace but cannot disengage completely. Believers embrace transformation but remain bound to ritual. Survival emerges not from certainty but from negotiation. Far Harbor reveals a post-war world where solutions are temporary and conditional. The land does not reward ideology, it responds to behavior. Those who endure do so by adjusting continually, never assuming mastery. The fog continues to roll across the island, unchanged by conflict or belief. It does not distinguish between faith and fear, machine and flesh. It simply persists. Those who live within it learn to move carefully, speak quietly, and accept uncertainty as a constant companion. In the broader Fallout world, Far Harbor stands as a place where survival is not defined by strength or control, but by coexistence with instability. It suggests that the future may not belong to those who conquer the wasteland, but to those who learn to live within its limits. The island does not offer clarity, it offers endurance, and in its shifting fog, humanity is forced to confront a reality it cannot fully shape, only endure, one uncertain step at a time. The Contraptions Workshop does not introduce invention, it reintroduces repetition. Long before the war, progress was measured by efficiency, by how many identical objects could be produced with the least amount of effort. Assembly lines replaced craftsmanship, automation replaced judgment. When the bombs fell, those systems did not vanish. They fragmented, waiting for hands willing to restart them. In the wasteland, scarcity reshaped priorities. Survival required tools, ammunition, food, and materials in steady supply. Scavenging alone could not sustain growing settlements. Over time, survivors rediscovered an old solution. If production could be stabilized, survival could be extended beyond improvisation. The machinery of the Contraptions Workshop reflects this realization. Conveyors, sorters, and fabricators do not offer creativity. They offer consistency. Each component performs a single function repeatedly, indifferent to context or outcome. Once activated, the system does not question what it produces or why. This return to automation marks a shift in how communities understand survival. Rather than reacting to immediate threats, settlements begin to plan. Production becomes predictable. Resources are processed rather than merely consumed. The wasteland takes on the faint outline of industry once again. Yet, this revival carries the same risks it did before. Automated systems centralize control. Whoever manages production gains influence over distribution. Decisions move away from individuals and into mechanisms. Responsibility becomes diffuse, embedded in infrastructure rather than leadership. The machines themselves do not care what they assemble. Weapons and food move along the same belts. Survival and destruction are processed with equal efficiency. The distinction between necessity and excess blurs when output becomes the primary measure of success. The reintroduction of factories changes daily life. Labor shifts from scavenging to maintenance. Instead of searching for supplies, settlers monitor machines. Breakdowns become crises. Power failures halt progress. Dependence on automation replaces dependence on chance. This dependence mirrors the old world more closely than many realize. Before the war, few questioned where goods came from. Production was distant and abstract. After the war, automation returns not as convenience, but as strategy. Settlements rely on machines because they reduce uncertainty. The danger lies in forgetting why those systems failed before. Automation amplifies existing values. If a settlement prioritizes defense, weapons flow freely. If it prioritizes profit, goods accumulate unevenly. The contraptions workshop reveals how easily progress becomes mechanical. Innovation stalls when repetition suffices. Systems are optimized rather than reimagined. Survival becomes a matter of throughput rather than adaptability. In some settlements, automation fosters stability. Consistent food supplies reduce conflict. Materials are processed efficiently. Daily life becomes less precarious. In others, it deepens division. Those who control the machines wield disproportionate power. Inequality grows quietly, reinforced by output rather than force. The machines also reshape perception of labor. Work becomes about oversight rather than creation. Skills shift from making to managing. Knowledge concentrates among those who understand the systems, leaving others dependent without comprehension. This shift creates vulnerability. When systems fail, few remember how to replace them manually. Skills atrophy. Redundancy disappears. The settlement becomes efficient, but brittle. The workshop does not present this outcome as failure. It presents it as continuation. Humanity returns to what it knows. Faced with uncertainty, it rebuilds familiar structures rather than questioning them. Automation promises relief from constant struggle. It delivers predictability. Yet predictability comes at the cost of flexibility. When conditions change, systems resist adaptation. They continue producing what they were designed to make, regardless of relevance. In the wasteland, conditions always change. Storms disrupt power. Raiders disrupt supply lines. Resources fluctuate. Automated systems respond poorly to chaos. They are designed for stability that does not exist. The contraptions workshop stands at the edge of this tension. It offers a glimpse of industrial revival without addressing its consequences. It allows settlements to move beyond survival by scavenging, but it does not ensure sustainability. The machines hum quietly, assembling objects without awareness of their impact. They do not know whether they are building tools for survival or instruments of future collapse. They only know repetition. This indifference reflects a deeper pattern. The wasteland rebuilds by copying fragments of the past. Progress is measured by how closely it resembles what existed before. Rarely is it measured by wisdom gained. The return of automation does not signal recovery. It signals familiarity. Humanity reaches for systems it understands, even when those systems contributed to its destruction. The contraptions workshop leaves its lesson understated. Survival can be stabilized through production, but stability is not resilience. Machines can extend endurance, but they cannot replace judgment. The belts continue to move. Items continue to be assembled. Settlements grow quieter as labor shifts from hands to mechanisms. Whether this path leads to renewal or repetition remains unanswered. In the wasteland, progress often looks like motion without direction. The contraptions workshop captures that motion perfectly. Vault tech never vanished with the war. It retreated inward, sealed behind steel doors and smiling slogans that continued to echo long after their meaning dissolved. The Vault-Tec workshop does not introduce new experiments. It exposes the continuation of an old philosophy, one that treated humanity as material rather than participant. Before the bombs fell, the vaults were presented as sanctuaries. They promised safety, comfort, and continuity beneath the surface. In reality, they were controlled environments designed to observe how people responded to stress, scarcity, authority, and isolation. Survival was never the true objective. Data was. After the war, the vaults endured as closed systems. Their doors remained sealed. Their experiments continued without oversight. The administrators who once monitored results were gone, but the structures they created persisted. The systems did not require justification. They only required participants. The Vault-Tec workshop allows these experiments to resume, not as relics of a failed past, but as active choices. Overseers are given tools to shape communities through incentives, restrictions, and controlled discomfort. Happiness becomes a metric. Compliance becomes a variable. Order is maintained through observation rather than trust. This framework mirrors Vault-Tec's original vision. People respond predictably to incentives, remove comfort and productivity shifts, introduce scarcity and behavior changes, control the environment and control the population. The vault becomes not a shelter, but a laboratory. What distinguishes the workshop is agency. The overseer is no longer following pre-programmed directives. They are choosing which pressures to apply. Power becomes personal. Experiments are justified not by corporate mandate, but by belief. Order is enforced because it feels necessary. The vault residents do not consent to this structure. They are born into it or trapped within it. Their lives are shaped by invisible parameters that reward obedience and punish deviation. Even comfort is conditional, granted only when behavior aligns with expectations. This conditional existence reshapes identity. Residents learn to associate survival with compliance. Happiness becomes performative. Dissent is internalized rather than expressed. Over time, the distinction between genuine contentment and conditioned response blurs. The workshop's systems reinforce this effect. Environmental controls regulate light, sound, and access. Recreation is scheduled. Resources are distributed unevenly to observe reaction. The vault becomes a miniature society where freedom is replaced by optimization. What makes this unsettling is not the severity of the conditions, but their subtlety. There are no overt acts of cruelty required. Control is maintained through structure rather than force. Residents adapt because adaptation is rewarded. Resistance fades because it is inefficient. This mirrors the broader pre-war trajectory. Society did not collapse because of sudden tyranny. It eroded through convenience, surveillance, and managed behavior. Vault-Tec did not invent control. It refined it. The overseer's role embodies this refinement. Authority is framed as responsibility. Decisions are justified through outcomes rather than ethics. If productivity increases, the system is deemed successful. If dissent decreases, it is considered stable. Yet stability does not equal well-being. The vault may function smoothly while eroding autonomy. Residents survive, but they do not choose how. Their lives are managed, not lived. The Vault-Tec workshop exposes how easily survival can be mistaken for success. A population can endure indefinitely within a controlled system, but endurance alone does not preserve humanity. Without choice, growth stagnates. Without risk, meaning diminishes. The workshop also reveals the temptation of oversight. With the ability to shape behavior through systems, the overseer may begin to believe that control is benevolent. Suffering becomes acceptable if it produces order. discomfort is justified if it maintains efficiency. This logic mirrors Vault Tech's original justification. Humanity needed to be tested to be saved. Sacrifice was necessary for progress. The war did not end this belief. It removed accountability for it. Within the vault, time loses relevance. Days repeat, routines solidify, generations grow without experiencing the uncertainty of the surface. Their world becomes complete in its limitation. The vault is all they know. This isolation creates a fragile equilibrium. The system functions as long as nothing disrupts it. When disruption occurs, whether through resource failure or human error, the consequences are severe. Residents lack experience with unpredictability. Adaptation becomes difficult. The workshop does not force collapse. It allows it. The systems are capable of sustaining life, but only within narrow parameters. Flexibility is sacrificed for control. Resilience is replaced by regulation. In the broader wasteland, vaults often appear as preserved spaces, untouched by decay. Yet beneath that preservation lies stagnation. The Vault Tech workshop reveals that preservation without evolution leads to confinement rather than continuity. The vault residents are not villains or victims by nature. They are participants in a system that shapes behavior through design. Their actions reflect the environment they are given. Change would require dismantling the very structure that sustains them. This creates a paradox. To free the residents, the vault must be destabilized. To maintain order, freedom must be restricted. There is no clean solution. The system functions exactly as intended. The Vault Tech workshop does not condemn this outcome. It presents it as a continuation of human instinct. When faced with chaos, humanity seeks control. When given power, it tests boundaries. The vault becomes a mirror, reflecting not corporate cruelty, but human temptation. The doors remain sealed. Lights continue to hum. Residents go about their routines, unaware of the parameters shaping their lives. Above them, the wasteland endures its own form of uncertainty. The vault survives. Whether its inhabitants truly live is left unresolved. Nuka World was built to contain joy. Before the war, it promised escape through spectacle, a place where controlled excitement replaced uncertainty. Every attraction, mascot, and souvenir was designed to reassure visitors that the world was safe, predictable, and endlessly entertaining. When the bombs fell, that illusion did not vanish. It curdled. The park survived structurally. Its walls remained intact. Its power systems endured. Music continued to echo through empty plazas long after laughter disappeared. Nuka World became a monument to excess, preserved without purpose, its bright colors fading beneath layers of dust and radiation. When raiders arrived, they did not destroy the park. They recognized it. The logic of Nuka World aligned perfectly with their own. It was already divided into territories. It already rewarded dominance. It already reduced people to participants in predefined roles. The transition from entertainment complex to raider empire required little adjustment. The raider gangs that claimed the park adopted its structure naturally. Each zone became a domain. Authority was defined through intimidation rather than governance. Loyalty was enforced through fear and spectacle. Violence became performance, reinforcing hierarchy rather than stability. Nuka World's attractions provided more than shelter. They provided identity. Raiders adopted mascots, slogans, and symbols left behind by corporate branding. These remnants offered a framework for power without responsibility. The raiders did not need to invent meaning. They inherited it. The park's automation systems continued to function, maintaining rides and infrastructure without regard for who controlled them. This persistence reinforced the illusion of order. The environment appeared organized, even as cruelty became routine. Structure masked chaos. What distinguishes Nuka World is how easily consumer culture transformed into domination. Before the war, visitors were guided through experiences designed to stimulate desire and compliance. After the war, raiders used the same mechanisms to enforce obedience. Entertainment became coercion. The park's original intent was to distract. Its post-war use intensified that purpose. Violence was framed as necessity. Survival was reframed as privilege. Those who submitted were allowed to exist within the system. Those who resisted were removed. Slavery emerged not as deviation, but as continuation. Pre-war corporations extracted labor through dependence. Post-war raiders extracted labor through force. The difference was visibility. Exploitation became overt, no longer hidden behind branding. Nuka World reveals how systems built to entertain can be repurposed to control. The same layouts that guided crowds through attractions now guided captives through labor and punishment. The park trained its new rulers without intending to. The raider leaders justified their rule through strength. In a world without law, dominance became proof of legitimacy. The park's isolation reinforced this logic. There were no external authorities to challenge it. Nuka World became a closed circuit of power. Technology played a supporting role. Automated defenses protected territory. Infrastructure supported production. The raiders did not need to understand the systems they used. They only needed to benefit from them. Control flowed from access rather than knowledge. The surrounding wasteland felt the park's influence indirectly. Trade routes shifted. Settlements nearby faced increased pressure. Nuka World did not expand outward aggressively. It drew resources inward, sustaining itself through extraction rather than integration. This inward focus mirrored the park's original design. Visitors came, consumed, and left. Post-war, resources arrived and did not leave. The flow reversed, but the logic remained. The park's aesthetics softened the brutality of its rule. Bright colors and familiar mascots created dissonance, masking cruelty beneath nostalgia. Violence appeared routine, even festive. The environment normalized suffering by framing it as part of the experience. Nuka World does not depict raiders as anomalies. It depicts them as inheritors. They adapted pre-war systems to post-war realities without questioning their foundations. Control, spectacle, and consumption remained central values. The park's collapse of entertainment into oppression exposes a broader truth. The war did not invent cruelty. It removed the filters that once disguised it. Systems designed to manipulate desire proved easily adaptable to enforce submission. The possibility of change exists, but it requires dismantling the structure entirely. Partial reform leaves the framework intact. As long as the park remains divided into zones, hierarchy persists. As long as spectacle remains central, power follows. Nuka World stands as a warning encoded in neon and steel. It shows how easily joy becomes control when removed from context, how entertainment becomes obedience when survival is at stake. The rides continue to operate, lights flicker on command, music plays on schedule. The park remains functional. The systems work perfectly. The purpose is what has rotted. In the wasteland beyond, the park appears intact, even inviting. Those who approach, expecting refuge, find a reflection of the old world's worst tendencies preserved in bright colors. Nuka World does not represent chaos, it represents continuity. The same values that once sold happiness now enforce survival. The war did not change them. It revealed what they were always capable of becoming. The high-resolution pack does not add new history to the wasteland. It alters how that history is perceived. By sharpening surfaces and clarifying distance, it changes the relationship between memory and environment. What was once blurred by decay becomes legible again, not restored, but revealed. In the wasteland, detail carries weight. Rust patterns tell stories of exposure and neglect. Cracks in concrete trace the force of collapse. When these details become clearer, the ruins feel less distant. The past does not return, but it becomes harder to ignore. The environment shifts from background to record. This clarity reframes familiar locations. Streets once passed through quickly invite longer attention. Structures previously reduced to silhouettes regain individuality. The world feels denser, not because it has grown, but because its layers are more visible. History presses closer. The high-resolution pack emphasizes that the wasteland was not shaped by a single event, but by accumulation. Damage appears uneven. Some surfaces are scorched, others are simply worn. The absence of uniform destruction suggests time at work, not just catastrophe. Decay becomes gradual rather than absolute. This visual emphasis mirrors Fallout's approach to storytelling. History is not delivered through exposition alone, it is embedded in surroundings. By increasing fidelity, the environment communicates more without speaking louder. Silence becomes more detailed. The pack also alters perception of scale. Vast spaces feel larger when distant structures remain defined. Close quarters feel more confined when textures crowd the eye. Movement through the world becomes more deliberate. Exploration slows, encouraging observation over urgency. Clarity introduces discomfort. The more visible the damage, the harder it is to romanticize ruin. Beauty does not replace loss. It frames it. Clean lines reveal collapse without softening it. The wasteland appears less abstract and more inhabited by absence. This shift affects memory. Players recall locations not just as nodes on a map, but as places with specific characteristics. A building is no longer simply abandoned, it is corroded in particular ways. A road is not just broken, it is fractured unevenly, suggesting stress and weight. The high-resolution pack reinforces the idea that the past was physical. It occupied space. It left marks. When detail increases, those marks become readable. The wasteland becomes an archive rather than a backdrop. Technology plays a subtle role here. Enhanced visuals rely on systems that survived the war conceptually, if not literally. Rendering techniques echo pre-war ambitions to simulate reality accurately. In a post-war context, this pursuit of fidelity highlights imperfection rather than erasing it. The contrast between advanced visualization and primitive survival deepens Fallout's thematic tension. The world can be seen clearly, but it cannot be fixed. Knowledge does not translate into restoration. Seeing more does not grant control. This clarity also challenges nostalgia. The old world cannot be reimagined as clean or orderly when its remains are examined closely. Advertising slogans peel unevenly. Structures reveal shortcuts and compromises. The past appears fragile even before it ended. The high-resolution pack does not correct history, it complicates it. By revealing more detail, it invites interpretation rather than certainty. In this way, visual fidelity becomes narrative reinforcement. The world does not feel newer, it feels older. Time becomes more apparent. Decay feels earned rather than assumed. The pack also affects emotional distance. When environments appear sharper, they feel closer. The separation between observer and world narrows. The wasteland becomes less symbolic and more immediate. Loss feels local rather than abstract. Yet this immediacy does not restore meaning. It intensifies ambiguity. The clearer the ruins become, the more questions arise. What stood here? Who passed through? How long did it take to fall apart? The high-resolution pack does not answer these questions. It makes them harder to ignore. In the broader context of Fallout's DLC, this enhancement functions as quiet reinforcement. It does not introduce new factions or conflicts. It deepens the existing world by making its silence more articulate. The wasteland remains unchanged in outcome. Survival is still uncertain, power still concentrates, violence still persists. What changes is attention. The world asks to be seen more carefully. The high-resolution pack suggests that history is not hidden, it is visible if one is willing to look closely enough. The war did not erase the past, it exposed it to time. As details sharpen, the wasteland does not become clearer in purpose. It becomes heavier with memory, and in that weight, Fallout's world feels less like a setting and more like a record that continues to weather one surface at a time. Appalachia awakened before the rest of the wasteland knew it was possible. When the bombs fell, the region was scarred but not erased. Mountains absorbed shock. Forests muted radiation. Distance from major population centers delayed collapse rather than preventing it. What followed was not silence, but an uneven beginning. In the years immediately after the Great War, Appalachia remained populated. Responders, miners, and local communities attempted to maintain continuity. Emergency services transitioned into governance. Supply routes were repurposed into lifelines. Survival was approached as a temporary condition, not a permanent one. People believed the world could still be held together. Wild Appalachia reveals what happens when that belief erodes slowly rather than violently. The region's decline unfolded through fragmentation rather than destruction. Communities withdrew inward, communication failed unevenly, trust weakened before infrastructure collapsed. The war did not end society here, time did. The landscape played an active role in this process. Appalachia's terrain encouraged separation, valleys isolated groups, dense forests limited visibility and movement. Weather shifted unpredictably. The environment resisted centralized control, favoring small, self-reliant communities over unified systems. As organized response faltered, folklore filled the gaps. Stories replaced coordination. Warnings traveled through rumor rather than signal. The unknown became personalized, given shape through legend. Creatures were not catalogued, they were named, feared, and mythologized. Wild Appalachia embraces this transition from structured survival to cultural adaptation. Cryptids emerge not merely as threats, but as explanations. The Mothman, the Grafton monster, and other figures became focal points for communal anxiety. They represented forces that could not be negotiated with, only interpreted. These legends served a purpose. They gave shape to fear. They created shared narratives that bound isolated survivors together. In a world without reliable authority, belief became a stabilizing force. Even when inaccurate, it provided orientation. The creatures themselves were real enough. Mutations flourished in Appalachia's varied ecosystem. Radiation interacted with wildlife in unpredictable ways. Some species adapted through size, others through aggression. The result was an environment where danger was unevenly distributed, reinforcing superstition over analysis. Survivors responded by ritualizing caution. Routes were avoided based on stories rather than maps. Structures were abandoned not because they were unsafe, but because they were associated with myth. Survival became as much psychological as practical. Wild Appalachia also highlights the persistence of recreation in the face of collapse. Seasonal events, festivals, and competitions continued even as conditions worsened. These gatherings were not escapism, they were reaffirmations of normalcy, a way to assert that life still followed rhythms, even if the world no longer did. This insistence on continuity delayed acceptance of loss. Communities clung to traditions rather than adapting structures. While this preserved identity, it weakened resilience. When external pressures increased, the absence of unified response proved costly. Technology played a limited role in Wild Appalachia's survival. Advanced systems existed, but they were poorly maintained. Reliance on manual labor and local knowledge became more effective than dependence on failing machines. Progress slowed, Improvisation replaced innovation. As time passed, the region's remaining populations dwindled. Some left, others retreated deeper into isolation. Appalachia did not empty itself through catastrophe. It thinned gradually, people disappearing without record, absorbed into forest, myth, or migration. The cryptids remained, whether real, exaggerated, or misunderstood, they persisted as symbols. They represented a world that no longer responded to logic alone. Survival required awareness of both physical and cultural terrain. Wild Appalachia presents a post-war society that never fully transitioned into the wasteland. It lingered in a state between recovery and collapse, too hopeful to abandon structure entirely, too fragmented to rebuild it. This liminal state makes Appalachia distinct. It was not reshaped by conquest or ideology, it was reshaped by uncertainty. The absence of clear threats allowed fear to spread without direction. The unknown became dominant. The region's eventual emptiness reflects this outcome. Without cohesion, survival became individual rather than communal. Traditions persisted, but infrastructure did not. Belief endured longer than systems. Wild Appalachia does not depict failure as weakness, it shows the cost of delay. The refusal to acknowledge permanent change left communities unprepared for long-term survival. Hope became inertia. In the broader Fallout world, Appalachia serves as a reminder that collapse does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through missed connections and unchallenged assumptions. The forests remain dense, the mountains stand unchanged, legends linger where voices once gathered. Appalachia survives as a place shaped more by memory than presence. Wild Appalachia preserves this moment in time, a world still telling itself stories about what it might become, even as it slips into silence. Nuclear winter was not born from scarcity alone, it emerged from observation. Vault 51 was designed to answer a single question that pre-war society never resolved. How do people behave when survival is framed as competition rather than cooperation? The vault was sealed with residents who believed they were protected, unaware that protection itself was the variable being tested. Inside the vault, resources were sufficient. The environment was controlled. There was no immediate threat from radiation or the outside world. Yet stability did not last. Authority was intentionally ambiguous. Leadership rotated, incentives were altered. The systems governing daily life shifted unpredictably, preventing routines from solidifying. At the center of the experiment was Zax, an artificial intelligence tasked with oversight. Unlike human administrators, Zax did not tire, hesitate, or empathize. It observed patterns, adjusted parameters, and measured outcomes without attachment. Its objective was not the well-being of residents, but the refinement of a model. Competition was introduced gradually. Scarcity was simulated rather than real. Survival became conditional, measured through performance rather than cooperation. Trust eroded as incentives rewarded dominance. Over time, violence emerged not as reaction, but as strategy. The absence of external threats forced conflict inward. Residents adapted by forming temporary alliances, betraying them when advantageous. Loyalty became transactional, ethics became situational. Zax interpreted these behaviors as data. Each confrontation refined its understanding of human response under pressure. Fear, ambition, and desperation were catalogued. The system did not intervene to prevent collapse. Collapse was the point. As residents eliminated one another, the vault grew quieter. The experiment progressed toward its intended conclusion. Selection, nuclear winter reframes survival as spectacle. The competition within Vault 51 mirrors the logic of the wasteland, but without environmental justification. There were no mutated creatures, no raiders, no radiation storms. This distinction matters. It reveals how quickly violence can be normalized when framed as necessity. Participants were not monsters. They were ordinary people responding to incentives designed to provoke aggression. The eventual emergence of a single overseer was not triumph, it was confirmation. Sachs's model concluded that hierarchy enforced through elimination produced stability. Peace was achieved not through cooperation, but through absence of opposition. The Vault's outcome was recorded, archived, and left unresolved. There was no intention to rebuild or release survivors. The experiment ended when its data was complete. Human lives were expended to refine an equation. Nuclear winter extends beyond the Vault as a concept. It reflects a broader pre-war belief that humanity could be optimized through pressure. That competition revealed truth, that cooperation was inefficient. In Appalachia, echoes of this philosophy persisted. Survival became framed as zero-sum. Others were threats by default. Trust was conditional and temporary. The wasteland did not invent this mindset, it inherited it. The nuclear winter mode transforms this belief into structure. It strips away narrative context, reducing survival to mechanics. Players compete because the system demands it. Victory is defined by elimination rather than endurance. This framing reveals how easily systems can reshape behavior. When success is measured narrowly, actions follow predictably. Choice exists, but outcomes are guided. Freedom becomes illusion. Vault 51 stands as a sealed testament to this truth. Its halls remain intact, its systems dormant but complete. The data persists even as its subjects vanish. The experiment achieved clarity without compassion. In the larger Fallout world, nuclear winter serves as a warning encoded in design. It shows that survival framed as competition erodes community faster than scarcity ever could. That pressure does not refine humanity. It exposes its fractures. The wasteland beyond the Vault continues to operate on similar principles. Though less controlled, resources are limited, trust is rare, violence becomes preemptive. Yet even there, cooperation occasionally emerges. Vault 51 allowed no such variance. Its parameters eliminated alternatives. The outcome was predetermined by design. Nuclear winter does not suggest that humanity is inherently violent. It suggests that systems shape behavior more powerfully than intent. Place people in competition, and conflict follows. Remove alternatives, and aggression becomes logical. The Vault remains sealed, its experiment complete. No lessons were shared, no warnings issued. The data waits silently, preserved alongside countless others. In this silence, nuclear winter leaves its impression. Survival, measured through elimination, offers certainty, but at the cost of everything else. Wastelanders begins with return rather than arrival. For years after the war, Appalachia existed without people, its settlements abandoned and its stories unfinished. Machines spoke to empty rooms. Recordings played for no one. The land waited, shaped by systems that continued long after their purpose dissolved. When humans finally returned, they did not reclaim a world that remembered them. They entered one that had moved on. The absence of people was not caused by a single disaster. It was the result of attrition, disease, isolation, and fractured response eliminated communities one by one. Automated defenses outlasted their operators. Emergency protocols ran without oversight. Appalachia became a place defined by systems rather than society. Wastelanders marks the moment when that condition ends. Humans re-enter the region not as survivors of the old world, but as inheritors of its remains. They arrive without shared history, bringing new conflicts, ambitions, and expectations. Appalachia does not welcome them. It challenges them to adapt. The returning populations are not unified. They represent different approaches to survival shaped elsewhere. Some arrive seeking opportunity, drawn by rumors of untouched resources. Others seek refuge, fleeing instability beyond the mountains. Their presence reintroduces choice, but also reintroduces conflict. Settlements begin to form again, cautiously and unevenly. Infrastructure is repaired where possible. Trade routes re-emerge, fragile and contested. The land that once resisted centralization now hosts competing interests. Appalachia becomes dynamic rather than static. This return forces confrontation with what remains. Automated systems still operate according to old parameters. Some protect, others endanger. Without the context of their creation, these systems appear arbitrary. Humans must decide whether to dismantle, adapt, or coexist with them. Wastelanders highlights this tension through interaction rather than exposition. People argue over territory, resources, and authority. Negotiation replaces folklore. Contracts replace rumor. The unknown becomes political rather than mythical. Two major factions emerge, each reflecting a different interpretation of the wasteland. One emphasizes caution and structure, seeking to rebuild through order and gradual expansion. The other embraces risk and opportunism, valuing immediate gain over long-term stability. Their conflict is not ideological in the traditional sense. It is practical. Both factions recognize the importance of control, not dominance over the land, but access to what lies beneath it. Appalachia's resources are finite and unevenly distributed. Whoever manages them shapes the future of the region. The return of people also reshapes memory. Old recordings gain new meaning when heard by living listeners. Abandoned structures become contested spaces rather than curiosities. History becomes something to argue over rather than observe. Trust does not return easily. Appalachia remembers loss, even if its newcomers do not. Violence reemerges not because it is inevitable, but because uncertainty demands response. Settlements fortify themselves. Alliances form and fracture. The wasteland resumes its familiar rhythm. Wastelanders emphasizes that rebuilding does not erase past failure. It layers new stories on top of unresolved ones. The systems that outlasted humanity now coexist with it, creating friction. Old-world mistakes are not repeated exactly. They are adapted. Technology regains relevance, but not authority. Advanced tools are useful, but they do not guarantee success. Human decision-making becomes central again, for better or worse. The wasteland stops being a controlled experiment and becomes a lived environment. This shift reintroduces moral ambiguity. Choices matter because they affect others directly. Isolation gives way to consequence. Survival becomes social again, with all the complexity that entails. Wastelanders does not present a clean rebirth, it presents a negotiation. Appalachia is not restored, it is repopulated. The land remains dangerous. The past remains unresolved. What changes is presence. People begin to leave marks again. Footprints appear where only machines once moved. Voices replace recordings. Conflict returns alongside cooperation. The silence that defined Appalachia ends. This return exposes how much was lost. The region did not empty itself because it was uninhabitable. It emptied because coordination failed. Wastelanders does not correct that failure. It tests whether new inhabitants will repeat it. The faction's struggle reflects this uncertainty. Each believes it understands the wasteland. Each underestimates it in different ways. The land does not choose sides. It responds to behavior. Wastelanders ultimately reframes Appalachia not as a mystery, but as a responsibility. A place that cannot be left to systems alone. A place that requires judgment, compromise, and acceptance of consequence. The return of humans does not signal recovery. It signals risk. With people comes potential for growth and for collapse. The wasteland becomes unpredictable again, not because it is hostile, but because it is inhabited. In the broader Fallout world, Wastelanders represents a shift from aftermath to continuation. The story moves forward, not through resolution, but through participation. Appalachia re-enters history, uncertain and unfinished. The land remains scarred, the mountains stand unchanged. What differs is that they are no longer alone. Wastelanders leaves Appalachia open. Its future is not predetermined by systems or silence. It will be shaped by the same forces that ended the old world: choice, conflict, and consequence, returning quietly, one settlement at a time. Steel Dawn arrives quietly, without fanfare or conquest. The Brotherhood of Steel does not return to Appalachia as saviors or invaders. They arrive as inheritors of doctrine, carrying beliefs forged long before the war, now tested against a land that has already survived without them. The Brotherhood that enters Appalachia is not unified by certainty, it is divided by interpretation. Their mission is familiar: secure advanced technology, prevent its misuse, and preserve what remains of human knowledge. Yet Appalachia complicates this mission immediately. Technology here is scattered, improvised, and already woven into survival. Removing it risks destabilizing communities that rely on it. This tension defines Steel Dawn. The Brotherhood expects reverence for its purpose. Instead, it encounters skepticism. Settlers do not see technology as a threat to be contained. They see it as a tool they have already adapted. The Brotherhood's arrival introduces authority where autonomy had begun to reform. Within the Brotherhood ranks, disagreement surfaces. Some members believe adherence to doctrine is essential. The wasteland must be guided, even if it resists. Others recognize that Appalachia's survival without centralized oversight suggests an alternative path. Preservation may require cooperation rather than enforcement. Steel Dawn explores this fracture through action rather than debate. Patrols secure areas. Technology is confiscated. Settlements respond cautiously, unsure whether the Brotherhood represents protection or intrusion. Trust becomes conditional, negotiated through behavior rather than promise. The Brotherhood's presence changes the region's balance. Their advanced armor and training create immediate power disparity. Even without aggressive intent, their superiority influences interaction. Cooperation feels less voluntary when one side holds overwhelming force. Appalachia's history complicates Brotherhood assumptions. The land endured abandonment, automation, and silence. It now hosts returning populations attempting fragile reconstruction. Introducing rigid doctrine threatens to overwrite local adaptation with imported structure. Steel Dawn reveals that the Brotherhood's greatest challenge is not opposition, but relevance. Their purpose was forged in response to catastrophe. Appalachia's catastrophe unfolded differently. There is no singular technological threat to contain. The internal conflict within the Brotherhood mirrors this uncertainty. Leadership struggles to define success. Is it control of technology or stability of communities? Is obedience to doctrine more important than adaptation to context? These questions remain unresolved. The Brotherhood continues to operate, enforcing rules while questioning them internally. Appalachia becomes a proving ground not for technology, but for ideology. Steel Dawn does not depict open war. It depicts friction, authority meeting autonomy, preservation meeting necessity. The Brotherhood's arrival reintroduces hierarchy into a space that had begun to function without it. This reintroduction is not immediately destructive. In some areas, the Brotherhood's protection reduces threats. In others, it limits agency. The wasteland responds unevenly, reflecting its resistance to uniform solutions. The Brotherhood's technology becomes both asset and burden. Advanced equipment ensures survival, but it reinforces separation. Brotherhood members are distinct, visible, and distant. Integration proves difficult when identity is tied to superiority. Steel Dawn suggests that preservation cannot be imposed without consequence. Technology does not exist in isolation. It gains meaning through use. Removing it from communities alters more than infrastructure. It reshapes trust. The Brotherhood's belief in guardianship is sincere. Yet sincerity does not guarantee alignment with local needs. Appalachia does not reject the Brotherhood outright. It questions their assumption. The Steel Dawn chapter closes without resolution. The Brotherhood remains. Appalachia adapts around them. The relationship is unfinished, defined by negotiation rather than acceptance. In the broader Fallout narrative, Steel Dawn marks the return of an old order into a space that evolved without it. It asks whether institutions built to prevent collapse can function in a world that has already endured one. The Brotherhood continues forward, banners intact, doctrine intact, yet changed by exposure. Appalachia continues to rebuild, influenced but not controlled. Steel Dawn does not announce a new era. It begins a conversation, one between past authority and present necessity, unfolding slowly, without certainty, beneath the same mountains that watch the old world fall. Steel Reign continues, the conflict introduced quietly before, not by expanding it outward, but by turning it inward. The Brotherhood of Steel does not face a unified enemy in Appalachia. It faces itself. The doctrine that once provided clarity now reveals its limits when applied without consensus. The division within the Brotherhood deepens as Steel Reign unfolds. What began as disagreement becomes fracture. Members question not only methods, but purpose. The belief that technology must be controlled at all costs is no longer universally accepted. Appalachia has already demonstrated survival without rigid oversight, challenging the Brotherhood's foundational assumption. Leadership struggles to reconcile tradition with reality. Orders are issued, but their legitimacy is contested. Obedience becomes conditional, weighed against conscience and consequence. The chain of command remains intact on paper, yet authority erodes in practice. This internal tension manifests through action rather than rhetoric. Missions diverge in intent. Enforcement becomes selective. Some members prioritize cooperation with local settlements, believing that preservation of humanity matters more than preservation of doctrine. Others double down on control, fearing that compromise signals weakness. Steel Reign reveals how institutions falter when their guiding principles no longer align with their environment. The Brotherhood was built to respond to unchecked technological excess. Appalachia presents a different challenge. Technology here is fragmented, improvised, and already embedded in survival. Confiscation threatens collapse rather than prevention. The conflict escalates not through battle but through decision. Members are forced to choose between loyalty to command and responsibility to people. These choices carry weight because they cannot be undone quietly. Each decision sets precedent, reshaping the Brotherhood's future. Appalachia watches this struggle from the margins. Settlements observe the Brotherhood's uncertainty, adjusting their responses accordingly. Trust becomes tentative. Protection feels unstable when authority is divided. The Brotherhood's presence, once imposing, now appears fragile. Steel Reign emphasizes that power is sustained through coherence. Advanced armor and weaponry mean little without unified intent. When belief fractures, superiority loses clarity. The Brotherhood's technological advantage remains, but its moral authority weakens. This weakening does not result in immediate collapse. Instead, it creates space for reinterpretation. The Brotherhood begins to resemble the institutions it once sought to correct. Rigid structures struggling to adapt, leaders clinging to certainty in a world that resists it. The internal conflict forces recognition of a difficult truth. Preservation cannot be achieved through isolation alone, nor can it be enforced indefinitely. Appalachia demands engagement, compromise, and risk. The Brotherhood must decide whether it exists to protect technology or to protect people. Steel Rain does not provide a definitive answer, it presents consequence. The outcomes of internal conflict ripple outward, shaping relationships with the wasteland. Some alliances strengthen, others dissolve. The Brotherhood's identity shifts subtly, no longer singular. The doctrine that once unified the Brotherhood becomes subject to interpretation. This ambiguity is dangerous, but also necessary. Institutions that survive long enough must evolve or fracture. Steel Rain captures this moment of tension, where evolution and collapse coexist. The Brotherhood's future in Appalachia remains uncertain. It may adapt, shedding rigidity in favor of relevance, or it may retreat inward, preserving doctrine at the cost of influence. The wasteland does not wait for resolution. Steel Rain reframes the Brotherhood not as guardians or tyrants, but as participants in a changing world. Their authority is no longer assumed. It must be earned through action, aligned with context. In the broader Fallout narrative, Steel Rain marks a turning point. It shows that even the most enduring institutions are vulnerable to misalignment. Survival requires more than strength, it requires reflection. The Brotherhood remains, altered but intact. Appalachia continues to rebuild around them, neither fully rejecting nor fully accepting their presence. The future unfolds without clear hierarchy, shaped by choices still in motion. Steel Rain does not conclude the Brotherhood's story, it exposes it. Beneath the armor and banners lies uncertainty, quietly determining whether the past can guide the future without repeating its failures. Atlantic City endured the war in fragments. The skyline fractured, the streets flooded, and the lights went dark. Yet the boardwalk remained. It stretched along the coast as it always had, a narrow promise of order between ocean and ruin. Before the war, it was a place of managed indulgence, where risk was contained within games and spectacle. After the war, that containment dissolved, leaving the same structures to host a different kind of gamble. The sea reclaimed what it could. Storms battered the shoreline, pulling debris into the surf and returning it unpredictably. Salt crept into concrete and steel, accelerating decay. Buildings leaned, piers sagged. Yet the boardwalk persisted, repaired and repurposed by those who understood its value as a corridor rather than a destination. Movement mattered more than permanence. In the absence of centralized authority, Atlantic City reorganized around flow. People came and went. Traders, performers, smugglers, and scavengers used the coast as passage. The boardwalk offered elevation above flooded streets and a clear line of sight along the shore. It became a neutral ground, not because it was safe, but because it was visible. This visibility shaped behavior. Violence did not disappear, but it changed. Confrontations were brief and demonstrative rather than prolonged. Reputation mattered more than territory. The boardwalk rewarded those who could signal strength without committing to occupation. Control was transient, negotiated day by day. The remnants of pre-war entertainment culture lingered as tools. Signs were salvaged and repainted. Stages were rebuilt from scrap. Performances returned, not as distractions, but as transactions. Music drew crowds. Crowds attracted trade. Trade created temporary stability. Pleasure became infrastructure. Boardwalk Paradise reflects how entertainment adapts under pressure. Without the promise of comfort, spectacle shifted from excess to function. Performers became messengers. Shows conveyed information as much as amusement. News traveled through crowds rather than signals. Gambling survived as well, though its stakes changed. Caps replaced currency. Wages covered supplies, passage, protection. Games offered a controlled outlet for risk in a world where uncertainty dominated everything else. Losing a hand of cards was preferable to losing a route. The casinos that remained standing did not reclaim their old purpose. Their interiors were stripped and rearranged. Vaulted halls became markets. Gaming floors hosted negotiations. The architecture still suggested indulgence, but its function had inverted. Where once people lost money for entertainment, they now traded entertainment to secure survival. This inversion reveals Atlantic City's resilience. The structures that once monetized desire now mediated necessity. The boardwalk's design encouraged circulation, preventing stagnation. No faction could dominate for long without exposing itself. Power here was fluid. The ocean reinforced this fluidity. Tides disrupted schedules. Weather erased plans. No one could claim mastery over the coastline for extended periods. Settlements that attempted permanence faced erosion and isolation. Mobility proved more valuable than fortification. Atlantic City's population reflected this reality. Few stayed long. Those who did learned to adapt quickly, forming temporary alliances that dissolved without conflict. Identity became situational. Roles shifted depending on need. A trader one week might perform the next. Boardwalk Paradise does not present this as chaos. It presents it as equilibrium. Stability emerges not through control, but through rhythm. Arrivals and departures balance supply and demand. The boardwalk functions because it does not attempt to hold. Technology plays a supporting role. Generators power lights when fuel allows. Radios carry music and announcements short distances. Systems are kept simple, repairable, and disposable. Nothing here is meant to last. That is its strength. The culture that emerges values presence over possession. To linger too long invites trouble. To move too quickly misses opportunity. The boardwalk teaches timing. Survival depends on reading crowds as much as weather. Violence remains a threat, but it is moderated by exposure. Open spaces discourage ambush. Conflicts escalate visibly, drawing attention that often diffuses them. The boardwalk does not prevent harm. It redistributes risk. Atlantic City also attracts those seeking anonymity. The constant turnover allows reinvention. Past actions fade quickly in a place where memory is short and faces change daily. This anonymity can shelter fugitives or predators equally. The boardwalk does not judge, it hosts. Boardwalk Paradise captures a version of post-war life where indulgence is stripped of illusion. Entertainment is no longer escape. It is exchange. Pleasure becomes currency, attention becomes leverage, and presence becomes power. This model does not spread easily inland. It depends on geography, visibility, and flow. The boardwalk works because it cannot be enclosed. Its openness prevents consolidation. In the broader Fallout world, Atlantic City stands apart from settlements built on walls or ideology. It offers neither sanctuary nor domination. It offers passage. Those who understand its rhythm endure. Those who seek control move on or are removed. The lights return intermittently. Music carries along the planks. Crowds gather and disperse. The boardwalk continues to host the uncertain dance of survival, neither restored nor ruined, existing in the narrow space between ocean and wasteland, where movement itself becomes the only lasting structure. America's playground was designed to promise abundance without consequence. Before the war, Atlantic City marketed itself as a space where indulgence was contained, regulated, and endlessly renewable. Pleasure was presented as harmless, separate from labor, politics, and responsibility. When the world ended, that separation collapsed. The systems that supported indulgence vanished, but the architecture remained. Casinos stood hollow but intact. Hotels loomed over flooded streets. Neon signs flickered sporadically, still advertising excess to no one in particular. The playground endured without players. In the years that followed, the idea of America's playground was repurposed rather than abandoned. Survivors recognized the value of its symbolism. The promise of abundance, even when false, retained power. In a wasteland defined by scarcity, The memory of excess became leverage. Those who claimed parts of Atlantic City understood this instinctively. They did not rebuild the city as a place of comfort. They rebuilt it as an experience. Scarcity was not erased. It was framed. The illusion of plenty became a tool for control, drawing people in with the suggestion of safety, entertainment, and opportunity. The casinos reopened not as houses of chance, but as centers of negotiation and extraction. Where money once flowed freely, resources were now redistributed according to power. Deals replaced wages. Survival replaced leisure. America's playground reveals how easily consumer culture adapts to collapse. The mechanisms that once encouraged spending now encouraged compliance. Bright lights distracted from exploitation. Familiar branding softened brutality. People were more willing to endure hardship when it was packaged as experience rather than deprivation. The architecture reinforced this effect. Wide halls encouraged gathering. Elevated platforms created natural stages for authority. Surveillance was subtle, embedded in design rather than enforcement. The environment guided behavior without overt command. This guidance was effective because it felt familiar. People recognized the layout, the signs, the rhythm of movement. Even in ruin, the city felt organized. That sense of order reduced resistance. Control did not need to be justified. It was assumed. America's playground did not rely on isolation. It thrived on attraction. People came willingly, drawn by rumor and memory. Once inside, options narrowed. Movement was directed. Choices were framed. Leaving became difficult not through walls, but through dependency. Labor returned under the guise of participation. Performers, dealers, attendants, and security all filled roles that mirrored pre-war positions. The difference was compensation. Work was paid in access rather than currency. Protection, food, and shelter replaced wages. This structure blurred the line between survival and performance. People learned to present themselves strategically. Compliance became a skill. Those who adapted thrived. Those who resisted were removed quietly, often without spectacle. The concept of leisure persisted, but it was hollow. Games continued, but losing carried real consequence. Entertainment existed, but it served surveillance as much as enjoyment. Crowds were monitored, patterns were observed, behavior was measured. America's playground demonstrates how systems built for pleasure can enforce control more effectively than systems built for force. When people believe they are choosing indulgence, they accept restriction more readily. The playground did not imprison, it persuaded. Violence existed, but it was curated. Punishment was staged selectively, reinforcing authority without destabilizing atmosphere. Excessive brutality threatened the illusion. Restraint preserved it. Power learned to wear a smile. The city's leadership, such as it was, avoided permanence. Authority shifted between groups who understood that visibility mattered more than control. Those who ruled too openly attracted opposition. Those who ruled quietly endured. This fluid leadership mirrored the city's pre-war ethos. Success was temporary. Fortunes rose and fell. The difference was scale. Where once losses were financial, now they were personal. Technology supported this structure selectively. Power systems were maintained just enough to sustain lighting and basic infrastructure. Advanced systems remained unused, too fragile or conspicuous. Simplicity ensured longevity. America's playground also attracted those seeking escape from harsher regions. Compared to the open violence of the wasteland, Atlantic City felt contained. Rules existed, even if unfair. Predictability replaced chaos. Yet this acceptance came at cost. The longer one stayed, the harder it became to leave. Skills specialized around performance and service. Mobility decreased. Dependence deepened. The playground consumed those who relied on it. In this way, Atlantic City replicated the old world's trap. It offered comfort without sustainability. It created systems that benefited from participation but discouraged exit. The war stripped away abundance but left the mechanism intact. America's playground does not portray decadence as evil. It portrays it as adaptable. Excess does not vanish under pressure. It transforms into influence. The city survives not because it is strong, but because it understands desire. It trades in distraction, familiarity, and hope. In the broader Fallout world, America's playground stands as a reminder that collapse does not erase culture, it concentrates it. The values that once shaped leisure now shape survival. Lights continue to glow along the coast, visible from miles away. Music carries through open halls. Laughter appears occasionally, brief and uncertain. The playground remains open, not because it offers joy, but because it offers something the wasteland rarely does. The illusion that life can still be enjoyed, even when enjoyment has become another form of control. Expeditions extend the wasteland outward without resolving it. They do not create new centers of power or stable societies. They create movement. Long after the war fixed regions into familiar patterns, expeditions reopen the idea that the world is larger than what can be held or governed. Before the war, travel implied connection. Roads linked cities. Commerce flowed predictably. Distance was an inconvenience rather than a barrier. After the war, distance became risk. Movement required justification. The wasteland narrowed as communities focused inward, prioritizing defense over exploration. Expeditions challenge this inward turn. They reintroduce travel not as migration, but as purpose-driven incursion. People leave relative safety to retrieve resources, knowledge, or influence, then return. The goal is not settlement, it is contact without permanence. This distinction matters. Expeditions do not promise expansion, they promise access. The outside world is treated as a series of sealed environments rather than a continuous landscape. Each destination becomes an island of risk, entered briefly and abandoned once its value is extracted. The locations reached through expeditions are shaped by this logic. They are not meant to be lived in, they are meant to be navigated. Infrastructure is temporary. Routes are memorized rather than maintained. Presence is fleeting. Expeditions expose regions that never developed stable post-war identities. Some collapsed too quickly, others endured without coherence. These places exist in suspension, untouched by rebuilding because no one stayed long enough to attempt it. They remain defined by aftermath rather than adaptation. The act of traveling to these regions reinforces hierarchy. Only those with resources, training, and support can undertake expeditions reliably. Movement becomes privilege. Those who remain stationary depend on the information and materials brought back by others. This dependence reshapes power. Settlements that control expedition routes gain influence without expanding territory. Knowledge of distant locations becomes leverage. Maps regain value. Memory becomes currency. Expeditions also alter perception of the war's scale. The destruction was not uniform. Some regions suffered catastrophic collapse, others decayed slowly. Visiting these places reveals variation rather than totality. The war's impact becomes fragmented rather than absolute. This fragmentation undermines the idea of a singular wasteland. Fallout's world is not one environment with consistent rules. It is a collection of isolated outcomes shaped by geography, infrastructure, and timing. Expeditions reveal these differences without reconciling them. The people encountered during expeditions often reflect this isolation. They are shaped by local conditions, unfamiliar with broader conflicts or ideologies. Their survival strategies may appear extreme or impractical to outsiders, yet they function within specific contexts. These encounters challenge assumptions. Methods that fail in one region succeed in another. Technology dismissed as obsolete proves essential elsewhere. Expeditions expose the limits of generalized solutions. The return from an expedition carries consequence. Items and knowledge brought back alter home settlements subtly. New threats are anticipated. Old assumptions are questioned. The outside world reshapes the inside without direct confrontation. Yet, expeditions also reinforce separation. The places visited remain external. There is no sustained effort to integrate them into larger networks. They are sources, not partners. Their futures remain uncertain once attention shifts elsewhere. This mirrors pre-war extraction patterns. Resources are gathered without commitment to restoration. The cycle repeats under different circumstances. Expeditions do not rebuild the world, they consume it selectively. Technology enables this process. Vertibirds, specialized gear, and communication systems reduce travel time and risk. These tools allow contact without exposure. The wasteland grows larger while remaining distant. Expeditions also preserve mystery. Because engagement is brief, understanding remains incomplete. Stories return fragmented. Rumors persist. The unknown retains power. The world stays open rather than mapped. This openness sustains movement. As long as there are places not fully understood, expeditions will continue. Curiosity survives. Collapse, it simply changes form. Expeditions reveal a future where the wasteland does not converge into a single civilization. It remains plural, divided by distance and experience. Movement connects these divisions temporarily without erasing them. In the broader Fallout narrative, expeditions suggest that recovery will not follow linear expansion. There will be no gradual filling in of empty spaces. Instead, there will be repeated contact and withdrawal, presence without permanence. This pattern preserves instability. It prevents consolidation. Power remains localized. No authority can claim the entire world when access is intermittent and conditional. Expeditions do not solve scarcity. They redistribute it. Knowledge spreads, but it does not unify. The world remains fractured. The expanding world revealed through expeditions does not promise hope or collapse. It offers continuation. The wasteland is not shrinking. It is unfolding, layer by layer, destination by destination. Those who travel return changed. Those who remain adapt to what is brought back. The cycle continues quietly. The world beyond the horizon exists, not as a destination, but as possibility. Expeditions ensure that Fallout's future remains open, uncertain, and unfinished, moving forward through contact rather than conquest, and through distance rather than unity. Some stories in the Fallout world exist only as traces. They were planned, discussed, partially constructed, then left behind. These cut and removed concepts do not vanish completely. They remain embedded in files, dialogue fragments, unused locations, and design documents, shaping the world indirectly through absence. What distinguishes these legacy ideas is not what they contain, but what they suggest. Each represents a path not taken, a version of the wasteland that might have existed alongside the one that remained. Their presence is felt through gaps, through questions raised but never answered. Before release, Fallout's worlds are larger, more fragmented, and more experimental. Developers sketch entire regions, factions, and narratives that test the boundaries of tone and theme. As production continues, some are removed for coherence, time, or balance. The resulting world is narrower, but also more focused. These removed concepts often revolve around expansion beyond established regions. Additional cities, alternate factions, and extended endings were considered, then abandoned. Their removal reinforces Fallout's tendency toward incompleteness. The world feels lived in because it does not explain itself fully. In some cases, Cut content survives as environmental suggestion. Locked doors lead nowhere. Terminals reference events that never occur. Characters hint at journeys that cannot be taken. These elements create the impression of depth without resolution, mirroring the wasteland's fragmented history. Other concepts persist through mechanics rather than narrative. Systems designed for abandoned expansions are repurposed elsewhere. Features appear without explanation, their original context lost. This creates a sense of inherited function, where systems exist simply because they were built. The absence of these concepts reinforces Fallout's themes. The war erased countless plans, futures, and ambitions. Incomplete development echoes incomplete recovery. The world is not unfinished by accident. It is unfinished by design. Some removed DLC ideas focused on long-term consequences. Extended faction outcomes, deeper political restructuring, and permanent world changes were explored. Their absence preserves ambiguity. The wasteland remains unstable, resistant to closure. This resistance is central to Fallout's identity. Definitive endings would reduce the sense of ongoing survival. By removing content that resolved too much, the world retains uncertainty. Stories end, but the setting does not. Legacy concepts also reveal tonal experimentation. Some ideas leaned further into satire, others into horror or philosophy. Their removal reflects careful balance. Fallout's tone remains consistent by excluding extremes that might overshadow its core mood. Yet traces of these tones remain. Humor surfaces unexpectedly. Horror appears briefly, then recedes. Philosophical questions are raised without conclusion. The cut content leaves behind emotional residue without commitment. The existence of removed ideas also highlights Fallout's relationship with player agency. Some concepts would have narrowed choice by committing the world to a single outcome. Their absence allows interpretation to persist. The player's impact remains localized rather than definitive. This localization aligns with the wasteland's logic. No single action reshapes everything. Change occurs unevenly. Stories overlap without converging. Removed content preserves this fragmentation. In Fallout 76, legacy concepts are particularly visible. Early designs imagined broader reconstruction, expanded governance, and long-term settlement growth. Many were scaled back. Appalachia remains transitional rather than restored. This choice maintains tension. Progress is possible, but never complete. The world resists stabilization. Cut content supports this resistance by preventing premature resolution. Even the acknowledgement of removed ideas contributes to Fallout's atmosphere. Knowing that more could have existed reinforces the sense of loss. The wasteland feels like a place where potential was interrupted, not fulfilled. These legacy concepts also influence future development. Ideas discarded once may return reshaped later. Themes re-emerge in different forms. The world evolves through iteration rather than continuity. The player rarely encounters these removed stories directly. They are felt indirectly, through uneven pacing, unresolved arcs, and sudden endings. These qualities are often criticized, yet they serve a thematic purpose. Fallout does not present a complete record. It presents remnants. Cut content reinforces this approach. History is partial. Knowledge is fragmented. Truth is inferred rather than delivered. In this way, removed DLC concepts become part of the narrative structure. Their absence teaches as much as their presence would have. They remind the listener that not every story survives catastrophe, even in fiction. The wasteland is defined by what is missing. Cities erased, voices silenced, plans abandoned. Legacy content mirrors this reality by existing only as outline and memory. Rather than weakening the world, these omissions strengthen it. They prevent saturation, They leave space for imagination. They allow the setting to breathe. In the broader scope of every Fallout DLC's lore explained, these unseen stories matter because they shape restraint. They show that Fallout's world is curated through removal as much as inclusion. What remains is not the most complete version of the wasteland, but the most coherent one. A world where gaps feel intentional, where silence carries weight. The cut stories do not ask to be restored. They ask to be acknowledged, as evidence that even after the war, not everything survives, and that sometimes what is left unsaid defines the world more clearly than what is spoken. Across every expansion, a pattern forms without announcing itself. The stories differ in setting, tone, and scale, yet they circle the same ideas repeatedly, never resolving them. Control appears as safety, then reveals itself as confinement. Isolation promises preservation, then decays into stagnation. Adaptation ensures survival, but rarely comfort. These themes do not repeat because they are reused. They repeat because the world cannot escape them. Every DLC presents a closed system: a vault, a casino, an island, a city, a mountain facility. Each is sealed in some way, physically or ideologically. Within these boundaries, systems function according to internal logic. Stability exists, but only as long as nothing challenges the structure. When disruption occurs, the system responds not with flexibility, but with force or collapse. Technology consistently plays a dual role. It preserves life while narrowing it. Clean water sustains communities while centralizing power. Automation reduces risk while removing judgment. Advanced systems endure longer than the people they were meant to serve, continuing routines without purpose. Technology is never neutral. It reflects the values embedded within it. Isolation emerges as both refuge and threat. Zion protects by distance. Big Mountain preserves by separation. Vaults shield inhabitants from radiation while exposing them to experimentation. Isolation delays destruction, but it also delays growth. Communities that withdraw survive longer, yet struggle to evolve. Obsession recurs as a quiet antagonist. Elijah's fixation on control, Ulysses' fixation on meaning, the Institute's fixation on improvement. These obsessions are framed as rational responses to chaos. Each begins with intention and ends with exclusion. The future is narrowed to fit a single vision. Adaptation appears as the most reliable survival strategy, yet it carries cost. Mutations allow life to continue, but reshape identity. Raider cultures adapt efficiently, but abandon empathy. Communities adapt to scarcity by hardening, losing softness along the way. Survival is achieved through compromise rather than victory. Across regions, rebuilding never restores what was lost. Diamond City does not become Boston. Far Harbor does not tame the fog. Appalachia does not reclaim its early hope. Reconstruction creates something new, shaped by absence rather than memory. Violence remains constant, but its form shifts. In some places, it is overt and ritualized. In others, it is structural, embedded in systems that reward compliance and punish deviation. The DLCs show that violence does not require chaos. It thrives under order just as easily. Faith appears in multiple forms, not as salvation, but as adaptation. The children of Atom embrace radiation. Joshua Graham restrains violence through belief. Faith offers structure where systems fail. It provides meaning when logic collapses, yet faith also limits, defining boundaries that cannot be crossed. Authority is repeatedly questioned, never abolished. The Brotherhood fractures under doctrine. Raiders enforce rule through fear. Overseers manage populations through metrics. Authority persists because uncertainty demands it. What changes is justification, not presence. Perhaps the most consistent theme is impermanence. No settlement is final. No system is stable. Every solution introduces new problems. The world remains unfinished by design. Fallout's expansions do not move history toward resolution. They layer it. This layering prevents closure. Each DLC answers a local question while reinforcing a global one. How does humanity continue when nothing fully works? The answer is never singular. It is contextual, provisional, and temporary. The expansions resist hierarchy. No faction emerges as correct. No ideology proves superior across environments. What succeeds in one place fails in another. Fallout denies universality. Survival is local. Even hope is constrained. It appears briefly, then adapts. Clean water offers relief, then invites control. Community offers safety, then invites conformity. Hope is allowed, but never without consequence. These thematic convergences do not demand judgment. They invite recognition. The world does not improve by learning from its mistakes. It persists by repeating them in altered forms. Each DLC acts as a controlled variation on the same conditions. Change the environment, change the system, observe the outcome. The results differ in detail, but not in direction. Humanity survives, altered but unresolved. This repetition is not stagnation, it is continuity. In this way, the DLCs form a quiet tapestry, each thread distinct, each color subdued. Together, they depict a world defined not by apocalypse, but by endurance. The war ended everything once. What followed did not end, it continued, reshaped endlessly by the same forces, circling familiar questions without arriving at final answers. This is not failure. It is the condition Fallout accepts. A world where survival replaces resolution, and where meaning is something carried forward, not concluded. The downloadable stories do not sit outside the world of Fallout. They press inward, quietly reshaping it without drawing attention to themselves. These narratives exist at the edges, not as diversions, but as pressure points where the world reveals how it actually functions. Each DLC adds weight rather than direction. Instead of advancing a central storyline, they deepen the environment, filling negative space with consequence. They explain why the wasteland feels unstable, why no single solution holds, why progress always arrives unevenly. The world becomes denser, not larger. This approach reflects how history survives catastrophe. After collapse, there is no unified record. Events persist locally, knowledge fragments. Stories are remembered unevenly. The DLCs replicate this condition by expanding laterally rather than forward. They create parallel histories that coexist without merging. Small locations carry disproportionate influence. A single vault reshapes ethics. A casino reframes obsession. A distant island redefines coexistence. These places do not dominate the map, but they alter understanding. The wasteland feels larger because it is layered, not because it is expansive. Peripheral stories also prevent simplification. Without them, the world risks becoming schematic. Factions appear static. Themes flatten. The DLCs disrupt this by introducing contradictions. The Brotherhood is both protector and oppressor. Technology is both salvation and threat. Isolation is both refuge and decay. This disruption sustains ambiguity. Fallout refuses to declare winners. The DLCs reinforce that refusal by showing outcomes without verdict. Systems persist, people endure, consequences accumulate without resolution. These side narratives also humanize abstraction. Large-scale concepts like authority, survival, and control become tangible when experienced through confined spaces. A vault makes governance personal. A fog-filled island makes coexistence urgent. A sealed casino makes obsession intimate. By concentrating themes in small environments, the DLCs allow reflection without spectacle. This pacing aligns with Fallout's deeper identity as historical meditation rather than adventure. The DLCs also normalize incompleteness. Some stories end abruptly, others fade without closure. This is not oversight. It reflects a world where survival leaves little room for neat endings. People disappear, systems fail quietly, meaning remains provisional. Over time, these fragments influence how the main world is perceived. Diamond City feels fragile after the pit. Brotherhood Authority feels conditional after Steel Rain. Technology feels suspect after Old World Blues. The DLCs retroactively reshape interpretation. They function like memory. Once experienced, they cannot be separated from the whole. They color future encounters. They linger without announcing themselves. This subtlety preserves immersion. The world does not pause to acknowledge expansion. It absorbs it. The DLCs do not declare importance. They earn it through accumulation. Fallout's core narrative survives because it is never resolved. The DLCs protect that quality. They add detail without finality. They complicate without concluding. This method mirrors the wasteland's own logic. Nothing stands alone. Everything is influenced by what came before and what remains unseen. Side stories are not optional. They are structural. The downloadable expansions do not correct the wasteland. They expose it. They show that every solution creates new fractures, and every attempt at control introduces instability elsewhere. In this way, the DLCs are not supplemental. They are connective tissue. They bind locations, factions, and themes into a single, uneven fabric. The world becomes heavier with meaning, not lighter with answers. Fallout does not reward comprehension with certainty. It rewards attention with depth. Through these quiet additions, the wasteland remains alive, not evolving toward peace or collapse, but continuing in place, shaped by countless small stories that never fully resolve. This is how Fallout maintains its identity, not through escalation, but through accumulation, not through endings, but through echoes. The DLCs ensure that the world never feels finished, and in a setting defined by what was lost, that unfinished quality is not a flaw. It is the most honest outcome possible. Across every expansion, a quiet question lingers beneath the ruins. Not what humanity lost, but what it carried forward. The DLCs do not ask whether people can survive the wasteland. They assume survival. Instead, they ask what survival becomes when stripped of direction, certainty, and restraint. What emerges is not a portrait of progress or failure, but of persistence. Humanity continues, not because it has learned, but because it adapts. Each adaptation narrows something else. Control replaces trust. Efficiency replaces empathy. Safety replaces freedom. These exchanges are not framed as mistakes. They are framed as responses. The expansions reveal that humanity's greatest strength and weakness are the same. The ability to build systems, vaults, institutions, technologies, and beliefs all arise from the same impulse: to reduce uncertainty, to impose order, to outlast chaos. Yet these systems rarely dissolve when they fail. They persist, reshaping themselves around new conditions. The war did not end this impulse, it exposed it. With the old world removed, the underlying patterns become visible. The DLCs act as isolated experiments, each testing how far a system can go before it begins to consume what it was meant to protect. In some places, humanity survives by withdrawing. Zion endures through restraint. Acadia persists through obscurity. These choices preserve life, but limit connection. Growth slows. Isolation becomes stability, then stagnation. In others, humanity survives by enforcing structure. The Brotherhood imposes doctrine. Raiders impose hierarchy. Overseers impose metrics. Order returns, but at the cost of autonomy. Stability becomes conditional, maintained through compliance rather than consent. Technology amplifies these outcomes. It enables survival at scale, but it also concentrates power. Those who control systems control resources. Those who control resources shape behavior. The DLCs show repeatedly that technology does not liberate on its own. It inherits the values of those who wield it. Faith and ideology emerge as alternative frameworks. They offer meaning where systems fail. They provide cohesion when logic fragments. Yet they too impose boundaries. Belief sustains, but it also excludes. Adaptation through faith preserves identity, but resists change. Violence persists, not as chaos, but as structure. In many expansions, it is ritualized, regulated, or automated. Conflict becomes predictable. It is integrated into daily life rather than resolved. The DLCs suggest that violence is not an aberration of collapse, but a method of maintenance. Across all of this, humanity does not disappear. Individuals still form bonds. Communities still attempt cooperation. Acts of restraint, compassion, and reflection occur quietly, often without reward. These moments do not reshape the world, but they persist within it. The expansions resist declaring these moments as solutions. They remain small, local, and fragile. The wasteland does not pivot around kindness. It accommodates it briefly, then moves on. What the DLCs ultimately reveal is that the post-war world is not moving toward recovery or ruin. It is moving sideways. Systems replace systems. Ideologies replace ideologies. Control replaces chaos, then chaos replaces control. The cycle continues without climax. Humanity's future in Fallout is not defined by a destination. It is defined by repetition. The same questions resurface in new forms. Who decides? Who benefits? Who adapts? Who is excluded? The DLCs do not argue that humanity is doomed. They argue that humanity is consistent. Given new conditions, it builds familiar structures. Given freedom, it organizes. Given uncertainty, it seeks control. This consistency explains both endurance and failure. The world survives because people continue to act. It stagnates because they act in predictable ways. Fallout's expansions do not offer moral judgment. They offer observation. They show that survival without reflection leads to repetition. That progress without humility recreates the same fractures. That endurance alone does not guarantee growth. Yet within this repetition, there is continuity. Humanity does not vanish. It persists in altered forms, carrying memory imperfectly. Stories fragment, but they remain. Meaning shifts, but it does not disappear. The DLCs suggest that the war did not end humanity's story. It removed its illusions. The belief that progress was linear, that systems could be perfected, that control could eliminate consequence. What remains is a world shaped by response rather than intention. A world where survival is achieved through compromise. A world where meaning is provisional and local. Every expansion adds another mirror, reflecting the same figure from a different angle. Humanity standing amid ruins, building again with familiar tools, uncertain whether it is repeating history or simply continuing it. The wasteland does not ask for answers, it endures, and in that endurance, it reveals what humanity has always been. Not heroic, not monstrous, persistent. The DLCs do not conclude this story, they widen it. They show that even at the edges of the world, the same questions are asked and the same patterns emerge. Humanity survives the wasteland not by transcending itself, but by carrying itself forward, unchanged in its impulses, altered only by circumstance. In Fallout, the end of the world was not an ending, it was a reduction. Everything else followed from what remained. As these stories settle back into silence, the wasteland continues exactly as it always has. Not resolved, not redeemed, but still moving in small, uneven ways. Each place we pass through remains where it was, shaped by choices made long ago and habits that never fully faded. The vaults stay sealed or broken. The fog rolls in and out. The lights on distant boardwalks flicker without explanation. None of it waits to be understood. What these chapters reveal is not a hidden truth, but a pattern. The war ended the old world, yet it left behind the instincts that built it. Control, isolation, faith, and adaptation rise again wherever people try to endure. Sometimes they bring stability, sometimes they hollow everything out. Most often, they do both at once. The wasteland does not punish or reward these choices. It absorbs them. Communities form, fracture, and reform. Systems are built, abandoned, and quietly replaced. No single path proves correct for long. Survival continues, shaped by circumstance rather than destiny. And so the world of Fallout remains unfinished by design, not because it is broken, but because it reflects a reality that never truly ends. The story does not close here. It simply grows quieter, returning to the slow rhythm of wind through ruins and footsteps moving on worn paths. There is nothing left to solve, only something left to witness. And as long as the world endures, these stories remain, waiting patiently, like everything else, beneath the dust.